with magma core devoured by Fenrir, his chaos force became chaotic, he felt power increase. Ezra Zephyr took in a deep breath, calming the emotions in his heart. In the next instant, however, his expression suddenly changed slightly as he heard an uproar. He dashed outside and cast their gazes at the sky. At this current time, 7 shooting stars-like objects were streaking past the horizon as vast and indescribably mighty auras filled the land, enveloping the entire city. The spiritual imprint boundary above Guardian of Continent began to open at this moment. The powerful voices rang out across the entire city. The hall keepers of Guardian of Continent respectfully welcomed the envoys of the 7 sacred sects. The arrival of the envoys from the 7 sacred sects had undoubtedly become the most discussed topic in the city. The blood of every prided genius was boiling, the eyes on their raised heads filled with anticipation. Everyone had heard of the famed 7 sacred sects. Entering any of them to train was akin to ascending the heavens in a single step. The 7 sacred sects were just too powerful, the overlords of this world. Even an enormous continent like this was merely akin to a remote corner in their eyes. However, the envoys did not show themselves after arriving. It was said that even the young geniuses' hall keepers weren't unable to meet them at that time. After all, the disparity in status between them was just far too great. Even if one party was only an envoy, it was still far from what a mere genius of border could compare to. Although the envoys from the 7 sacred sects did not reveal themselves, it did not hinder the gradual rise in excitement within the city. At the very least, everyone knew that the arrival of the envoys meant that the opening of the Spirity Bailiwick was fast approaching. Unlike everyone else, the Prince of Bloodfang paid no attention to the arrival of the envoys. All his attention had been invested in learning the concept of the second circle spell. At this current point in time, it had already been noon since the envoys from the 7 sacred sects had arrived. Inside a certain tent, Ezra Zephyr sat alone next to the opening of the tent. Bipasha was with the group of Bloodfang, teaching them some basics. He had spent yet another hour immersed in the study of second circle spell and was currently taking a little time off. After drinking some of the fine tea of that area, Ezra shook his head in dissatisfaction. Having spent so much time with his mother, he had now grown to become exceptionally picky about his tea leaves. He seemed to fall into thought for a moment, before retrieving a shining pot from his spatial bracelet. It was part of the good stuff he had collected from his mother, and it just so happened that this was a good time for him to have a secret sample. As such, the prince enjoyed his drinking alone, his tense mental state slowly relaxing in the process. The truth was, his zealous practicing for the past 5 years had indeed been due to the pressure from Brownmane. It would indeed be a joke if the lead that the latter had accumulated over the years was so easily surpassed. Even though they took my spirit, destiny provided me something much better. I am confused whether to curse them or thank them. Ezra's gaze faintly flickered in thought as he grinned. Of course, it was true that he got the spirit of Fenrir. But everything else was granted to him from his hard efforts. The days in cave training could be counted as days spent in hell. All the other prided geniuses were at the peak of the chi brightening stage, while Ezra was at the 5th stage. What if he encounters the geniuses from the very start? Those geniuses are nurtured from their birth. Ezra was confident in his combat, but he was concerned about the spiritual energy difference. It seems that I need to find a chance to ascend to the 7th level of the chi brightening stage in the Spirity Bailiwick. Ezra's heart churned. While Ezra was lost in thought, he suddenly sensed some activity beside him. He lifted his head to look, only to find that a very skinny man was now seated in front of him. This man's appearance was pretty decent and he wore gold, while the greenish smoke wafted from the pipe in his hand. He looked exactly like an old wealthy merchant that had just left his carriage. At this current moment, the man was anxiously staring at the cup of excellent tea that was in Ezra's hand as he forced a smile and said, "Young one, your tea smell is not bad." Ezra was stunned, somewhat unable to figure out where the skinny middle-aged man had come from. He was unable to sense much spiritual energy undulations from the latter's body. "Boy, he is as powerful as your grandfather, or, maybe more," said Fenrir. Hearing that, Ezra was perplexed. The sight of the man's anxious appearance made him smile as he pushed the pot over. The old merchant-like man hurriedly received it upon seeing this and made a cup for himself. A heartful smell later, an enchanted look filled his face. Not bad, not bad. If Uncle likes it, I'll give it to you. Ezra chuckled, trying to figure out what was happening. The middle-aged man's eyes immediately brightened as he excitedly responded, "Then I'll give you my thanks, young one." He took another sip before picking up his pipe again and drawing in a deep breath. Green smoke rolled out, its fragrant flavor causing the surrounding people to turn their heads, but no one entered Ezra's tent. The neat middle-aged man enjoyed a puff of smoke as he remarked, "Young one, there's something amiss about the way the others look at you." Ezra shot at him. He knew that it was because news of the grudge between him and the Brownmane Empire had already begun to spread. From their point of view, he was only a 5th level of chi brightening stage practitioner, and yet he had an enemy like Victor Brownmane. This was undoubtedly akin to having half a foot in the grave, according to rumors. Ezra smiled and said, "I have a life-or-death enemy called Benedict Brownmane, and his younger brother who is more genius than him is here. They likely believe that I'm screwed." Benedict Brownmane? The middle-aged man seemed to have heard of this name. His gaze immediately filled with pity as he looked at the werewolf prince and said, "Then you are indeed rather pitiful." The prince laughed, unoffended. He was already used to such a response. However, the middle-aged man quickly crowded over and said in a low voice, "Moreover, I've heard that the envoy from Holy Law sect has already met Victor Benedict and is very satisfied with him. As long as Victor is able to distinguish himself in the Spirity Bailiwick, he will be accepted into Holy Law sect and become their disciple." Holy Law sect? Ezra's heart shook a little. By this current point in time, he had already gained some knowledge concerning the 7 first-tier sections. It was said that Holy Law sect was the strongest among the 7 sects. He never imagined that the envoy from Holy Law sect had already met with Victor Brownmane. The prince's eyes flickered, before eventually returning to calmness. He stared at the well-looking man and asked, "Does Master work at a hall in Guardians of Continent?" Outsiders would not be privy to such information. Only those in the inner residence might catch some scraps. The wealthy-looking chuckled and continued to drink his tea. He sucked on his pipe and breathed out swirling green smoke as he shot a sideways glance at Zhou Yuan. "Young one, if you wish to take your revenge, the Spirity Bailiwick will be your final chance." Ezra nodded, not saying anything else. "I'll be taking these tea leaves, don't drink them too much, it's bad for your age." The man grinned as he kept the pot in his sleeves. He breathed out a puff of smoke as he looked towards Ezra. "Young one, the Spirity Bailiwick will open tomorrow. There's someone who has great expectations of you, so you better put in some effort. If your performance ends up terrible, it will really be a little embarrassing." Ezra was taken aback, somewhat confused. There seemed to be a deeper meaning within the man's words. Plus, how did he know when the Spirity Bailiwick was opening? The prince asked, "Who are you?" The skinny man did not reply, merely waving his hand as he puffed out another ring of green smoke. His fancy shoes walked on the ground as he unhurriedly made his exit. The young werewolf's eyes were filled with confusion. This man was not as simple as he had thought. However, he did not dwell too much on this event, spending a little more time sitting alone, before rising and coming out. "Your Majesty, what was that fragrance?" asked Zulfi Dimitri. "Which fragrance?" Ezra parried the question with a curious face. Ezra heard footsteps. He changed his sight direction only to find Bipasha coming. "I have something to ask?" "Go ahead," answered Ezra. Bipasha looked at Zulfi with a side eye. "Here?" Ezra smiled, "Yes, here." "Then I'll be straight, where did you get special grade sword?" Ezra stayed calm for a while before asking a question in lieu of an answer. "Am I entitled to answer that?" "No," there was a quietness of dissatisfaction in her tone. "How many do you want?" the prince asked boldly. Bipasha equally flinched, her eyes widened in astonishment. You have more?" "That's not the answer to my question, I don't have all day, Miss Bipasha." "Tell me." How many do you want? Ezra was firm in his attitude and words. What's the price? Bipasha acted like a seasoned merchant. The prince grinned wickedly and stepped towards Bipasha. Snniaff. He smelled the body scent of the lady, so loud that even Zulfi heard that. It was as if a hungry wolf was sniffing its juicy prey. Bipasha jerked slightly because of Ezra's strange behavior. She recomposed herself and said in a loud voice. What's the price? The loud voice akin to a cry destroyed the mood of Ezra. He looked at her and then smiled as he uttered. You are the price. By the time the next day arrived, the entire Guardians of Continent territory was already boiling with excitement. Especially when 7 streaks of light flew out from the sky and headed directly for the Spirity Bailiwick. The countless geniuses inside the city also rose into the air, treading on their contracted beasts or armaments as they shot forth, covering the sky and earth like locusts. The Prince of Werewolves gazed upon this magnificent scene, before turning his head towards his people. We should go too. Dur had practically attached himself to Ezra after that incident. He always wanted to be at His Majesty's side. Shifa Pista could not be bothered to say anything, while Argus Waska was purely waiting for the fun to start. Ezra turned his head to look at Bipasha before saying, prepare the price and the items will be yours. He said and jumped on a floating buggy. Hence, the group also moved, heading towards the Spirity Bailiwick. The Spirity Bailiwick was about 30 miles away. At full speed, it did not take much time for the group to reach their destination. Ezra peered into the distance, where a giant, practically endless basin had appeared at the end of his sight. Mist shrouded the sky above the basin, giving off faint but strange undulations that made one's heart shiver. Under the mist was an incomparably large river. Light glimmered on the surface of the river's calm and ripple-less waters that gave one a feeling of depthlessness. This should be the holy river that encircled the outer region of the Spirity Bailiwick. Countless figures descended, extending all the way to the end of one's sight. No one knew just how many people had come. Outside the Spirity Bailiwick were 7 titanic stone platforms on which figures were landing one after another. Bloodfang Kingdom's group also landed on one of the platforms. Above the platforms, 6 powerful Genesis Chi torrents whizzed about like storms. Within the storms, one could just barely discern 6 seated figures. Ezra Zephyr inquired in a low voice, so, these are the envoys from the 7 first-tier sects? Dur nodded and replied, yes, it is said that all 7 are experts that have reached the nascent soul stage and the mage from Continental Magic Academy is at the 8th circle stage. 6 nascent soul stage cultivators and 1 8th circle sorcerer. Ezra could not help but sigh in admiration. These experts were top class even in the Naren continent. Dur was making binoculars with his hands as he said with a grin, the symbol of the one above this stone platform of ours belongs to Holy Law Sect. Holy Law Sect. Ezra's eyes narrowed slightly. The tea-loving man from yesterday had mentioned that the Holy Law Sect envoy had already taken a liking to Victor Brownmane. As long as the latter's performed well in the Spirity Bailiwick, he would be accepted into Holy Law Sect, ascending the heavens in a single step. While these thoughts swirled in the prince's mind, he suddenly lifted his head and looked towards a certain spot in the distance where a slim handsome reddish figure was standing with his hands behind his back. A strong and powerful aura pulsed from his body, making it such that none of the surrounding geniuses dared to approach. That pressure naturally originated from the second prince of Brownmane. Victor also tilted his head at this moment, his emotionless gaze sweeping across Ezra before pausing. That loser werewolf, he is not worried or afraid a bit. A carefree bum always dies first, I might not have to dirty my hands on him. Victor's eyes rippled faintly. But deep inside his body, his guts were telling him to be wary of that werewolf. The crippled prince of the Bloodfang Kingdom did have some ability. Truly a troublesome fly, his presence is pissing me off, mumbled Victor as a strange light suddenly appeared in his eyes. It was at this very moment that Ezra suddenly felt all the hairs on his body stand as a strange feeling of danger surged in his heart. His eyes firmly locked onto Victor Brownmane. The latter suddenly raised his hand at this moment, his 5 fingers tightly clenching into a fist, before throwing a punch at Ezra. Scarlet red chi whizzed forth like a scorching sun, swift as thunder as it shot towards the Prince of Bloodfang. "You lion man bastard, how dare you!" Argus and Zulfi detected the attack and immediately shouted out in anger. Their senses evolved after their training with the kings of Bloodfang, and vigorous chi exploded from their bodies. Iciness also flashed across Ezra's eyes as the black bolts on his black dress began to tremble. However, just as they were about to stop the attack, an overwhelming pressure suddenly descended from the sky, forcing all of their chi back into their bodies. The Holy Law Sex Envoy? Argus's and Zulfi's grave faces changed. The pressure had come from the first-degree sex envoy seated in the sky above. Meanwhile, the scarlet red fist of light had already arrived before Ezra Zephyr. Even a beginner core formation expert would fear the immense power contained within it. "That guy is dead." One of the geniuses in the vicinity sighed. No one had expected that Victor would suddenly attack, not to mention his mercilessness. He clearly intended to kill Ezra Zephyr with a single punch. The rage filled Zhou Yuan's crimson-red eyes, the ferocious undulations that swept towards him naturally making his pupils tighten. However, he did not panic at this critical juncture, but instead suddenly took half a step forward. He raised his hand in response, "Chaos Force!" Ezra cried. In the wake of the rage in Ezra's heart, lightning began to weave together in front of him, forming a black web like a shell that was a few feet wide. The crackling thunderous shell gave off a feeling of destruction as if it was capable of destroying any heavy blow that could shatter a mountain. Boom! The scarlet red light fist smashed into the chaos lightning shell, scarlet red chi raging as the black bolt thundered. The fist was eventually crushed and completely destroyed by the chaos force. Ezra lowered his hand down, the lightning vanished right after, and his gaze was still looking at Victor. Fierce and bloodthirsty. Countless gazes looked over as several people frowned. The actions of the second prince of Brownmane Empire were really somewhat ugly. His level was clearly far beyond Ezra's, and yet the former still had to resort to such tactics. "That other guy is probably dead, right?" Numerous voices rang out as they looked towards the dust cloud. Somewhere else far away, Salim Ukuli, Emily Jomez, and the rest involuntarily burst out into laughter when they saw this scene. The sight of the Bloodfang's prince had finally become too irksome to Brownmane's prince. Victor Benedict's expression remained indifferent as if his previous action had merely been akin to swatting an annoying fly. Everyone stared as the dust settled. Next, their expressions suddenly changed. They had discovered that a figure was still standing within the falling dust. The stone floor beneath his feet had fractured, and strange black bolts could faintly be seen on his whole body. However, the bolts slowly dimmed and vanished. Ezra Zephyr's expression was serene, but the killing intent that swelled within his eyes was practically akin to a bursting dam. If not for the mastery of his force black lightning and the 6th-grade martial spirit called Fenrir, Victor would have killed Ezra by now. "Your Majesty, are you all right?" "Prince Ezra." "Your Majesty." Argus and Shafa along with others rushed to their prince's side. Out of the bracelet, Skull and Hattie jumped out and growled, their tiny body rapidly growing as they transformed into mysterious giant wolves. Fire and ice pulsed from their enormous mouths as they glared at Victor Brownmane. They were extremely intelligent, and although they normally treated Ezra as their friend, but in their eyes, Ezra was the closest person to them besides Fenrir. He was like their big brother. It was not fine for them to see anyone bully their elder brother, and the fact that this person had suddenly attacked was truly unforgivable. The surrounding prided geniuses hastily retreated when they felt the wolf's ferocity. At the same time, Zulfi's face had turned inconceivably cold for the first time. His hands were tightly clenched around his sword on his back and his gaze was eerily frosty as the chi between his hand and the sword's handle began to ripple faintly. "Don't be rash." Ezra reached out a hand, grabbing Zulfi's firm wrist and gripped it tightly. He remembered the words of Fenrir to control his emotions and not be controlled by them. Zulfi Dimitri looked towards his prince. His angry face calmed down and he bowed. He gritted his teeth to the point where its noise could be heard. He blamed himself that he had nearly allowed the Brownmane Prince to kill Ezra in front of him. Stop! A booming shout descended from the sky at this moment. The Holy Law Sect's envoy had turned his gaze down, the pressure of a nascent soul stage expert sweeping down, suppressing Skull and Hattie, such that they were unable to move. The Holy Law Sect envoy growled, "The Spirity Bailiwick is about to open, don't cause any trouble." Dur angrily said, "Then why didn't you stop Victor Brownmane earlier?" The corners of Shifa Pista also curled downwards as she remarked, "This envoy doesn't know the meaning of fair." How could they not understand by now that the Holy Law Sect's envoy had purposely suppressed them earlier, preventing them from aiding Ezra? It was obvious that the envoy of the Holy Law Sect was protecting Victor. The surrounding geniuses also broke out into whispers. The actions of the Holy Law Sect's envoy were indeed rather unfair. In the sky above, the envoy's expression turned somewhat ugly. He swept a cold glance at Ezra and the rest and declared, "Since you have complaints, don't enter the Spirity Bailiwick." The faces of Bloodfang Kingdom's martial masters turned grave. "What a disgraceful envoy," they said. However, just as the Holy Law Sect envoy's words rang out, a figure within a similarly dazzling ball of light in the far-off sky seemed to turn his gaze and looked in their direction as a mocking voice subsequently followed. "Haha, stupid old man, you're representing the Holy Law Sect, at least try to act as if you belong to a noble seven sect." "Haha, they are twisted to their cores," said another female from the sky. "Holy Law Sect? More like wicked lawless sect," another voice came. As the mocking voices rang out in the sky, countless gazes were drawn over. The ones who had spoken were also the envoys from the 7 first-degree sects. Under the attention of those countless gazes, the glaring rays from the ball of light began to weaken, revealing the figure within. One would see a rather slim and gentle-looking middle-aged man with a well-maintained dress seated there, with a pipe hanging from his mouth. Boundless spiritual energy violently swirled around him like a storm, seemingly causing the world around him to tremble. Ezra was stunned by the sight of this figure. It was the same person who had asked him for tea yesterday. He would never have imagined that the tea-lover stranger would turn out to be one of the envoys from the 7 top sects. The second voice was released by a beautiful lady. She had brownish attire, while her figure and face were veiled. The last voice was from a shirtless man, who had numerous sword gashes on his body, old and new. He had 2 swords on both sides of his waist. Above the stone platform where the Bloodfang Kingdom's prince and the rest were located, a dark look was revealed on the fair clean-shaven face of the Holy Law Sect's envoy called Levos. He shot a glance at the well-dressed middle-aged man, ignoring the other 2 and said, "Oh? What teachings do you have, Orama Finwi?" The middle-aged man in gold puffed out a breath of green smoke, smiling faintly as he replied, "I've no interest in teaching. I only want to tell you that you don't have the right to banish anyone here, because amongst them may be the future seedlings of the other 6 sects." Levos's expression darkened. Just as he was about to retort, the other envoys of sects spoke up to mediate. "Both of you should hold back a sentence or 2. All 7 of us are required to break through this mist, and it will be almost impossible if anyone is missing." In the end, Levos coldly snorted. His gaze icily swept across Ezra Zephyr and the rest, before glancing at Victor Brownmane with a trace of dissatisfaction, evidently displeased that the latter had not killed the Prince of Bloodfang in a single punch, causing trouble for him. The second prince of the Brownmane Empire paid no heed to this dissatisfaction. He merely looked towards Ezra as his eyes narrowed slightly. The fact that the latter had cancelled his punch had likewise surprised him. The werewolf prince lightly swung his unhurt arms. The slight throbbing that emanated from them was a testament to the power of Victor's earlier punch. If Ezra did not have such force and spirit, he would have likely ended up seriously injured or dead. It seems that the other party was beginning to feel a little threatened now that he has an unknown spirit and planned to finish him off in the quickest way possible. However, from a certain point of view, wasn't this a good thing? Ezra's face was akin to a serene ripple-less lake as he stared at Victor, but the killing intent in the former's eyes had reached its peak. With a sudden laugh, Ezra slowly lowered his eyelids. From what he could see, the Prince of Brownmane was not as indifferent towards Ezra as he looked. The actions of the former were clearly saying that he, Victor Brownmane, was afraid. He was afraid that he would lose everything he possessed, his respect, his fame and his moniker of more genius than Crown Prince. He was afraid that Ezra was really able to take everything back. The prince gently patted Skull and Hattie's heads, causing the latter's gigantic bodies to slowly begin to shrink. However, malicious intent still filled their eyes as they tightly locked onto Victor Brownmane. By the side, Zulfi was silent for a while before he said, "I will teach him a lesson if I meet him in the Spirity Bailiwick. Don't you dare to touch him, he is mine. You can play with other Brownmane bastards," answered Ezra. Zulfi was stunned for a moment, before shooting a glance at others youngsters of Brownmane. It seemed that Victor's actions had truly angered the prince's subjects this time. The prince scratched the back of his head, and could only say, "Try to take it easy." By the side, Argus's gigantic hands were holding a solid fist as he silently gazed at Ezra. The latter was so domineering at this moment. After all, there were not many who had the qualifications to speak such words in the face of Victor Brownmane. As the hostile atmosphere began to recede, the watching Salim Ukwali, Emily Jomez, and the rest shook their heads in disappointment. No one had expected that Ezra Zephyr would actually be able to withstand Victor Brownmane's powerful punch. "This kid does have a little ability," nonchalantly remarked Salim. The corners of Emily's ruddy little mouth turned downwards. "He's just lucky. Given his capabilities, only death awaits him if he encounters Victor for real." The others nodded in agreement and chorused, "If he's unfortunate enough to bump into us in the Spirity Bailiwick, we'll be sure to teach him a proper lesson and give Miss Emily some justice." As they spoke, the 7 envoys in the sky concentrated on the mist above the holy river and suddenly acted at the same time. BBZZZZZ. 7 raging rivers of spiritual energy that spanned several hundred feet abruptly burst out from the top of their heads. Like giant pillars, the spiritual energy barbarically shot into the seemingly endless mist. The spiritual energy pillars began to sweep and vibrate, tearing apart the mist one layer at a time. However, there was a terrifying power within the mist. Ancient imprints appeared and began blasting the 7 spiritual energy pillars, shaving away layer after layer of spiritual energy. In the sky, the faces of the 7 envoys were grim, not daring to be the slightest bit negligent as they poured all of their attention into their chi and mana. Astonishing auras erupted from their bodies, causing even the color of the world around them to change slightly. The prided geniuses below were silenced due to fear. Such power was still far beyond their reach. "So that's the power of nascent soul stage expert?" mumbled Ezra Zephyr under his breath. After the chi brightening stage was the core formation stage, and above that was the foundation establishment stage. Once one reaches this level, the spiritual energy in one's body began to transform and evolve. It says that in this stage the martial master can speak to his spirit, forming a more closed bond and inheriting more of the powers and wonders of a martial spirit. Under the watching eyes of countless geniuses, 6 glowing pillars of chi and one that contained mana continued to stir within the mist. The 7 envoys gave their all, and everyone soon began to see a faint cavity appear within the thick, almost vicious mist. As one peered past the thin mist, one seemed to be able to see the ancient land of the infamous Spirity Bailiwick. "Everyone, enter now." While the crowd was focused on the gap within the mist, the shouts of the 7 envoys rang out like thunder. The moment these words were said, it was as if the entire world began to heave. Countless prided geniuses immediately shot forward, transforming into glowing figures as they charged into the cavity within the mist. The Prince of Bloodfang, Ezra Zephyr, looked towards the rest and said, "We should get a move on too. No one knows what will happen in the Spirity Bailiwick, so remember one thing, do not die, and..." His eyes shot a burning glare as he continued. "Do not spare anyone." Zulfi, Argus, Shifa, and Thur nodded along with the others. SWIISSSHH. In the next moment, they shot forward together. The group reached the hole within the mist in the short span of a dozen breaths. No one dared to tarry, pushing their spiritual energy to the limits as their speed soared. "We're about to enter." Ezra watched the faint white mist surge towards him as he took in a deep breath, and then the chaos force around him flickered as it protected his body. Crackle. Their bodies finally hit the mist. Space began to distort as if they were crashing into another world, making it impossible to steady one's body, and have no choice but to be randomly tossed around. Ezra Zephyr was thrown around till he saw stars. A long time seemed to pass before he finally felt the space around him solidify as his body was powerfully flung outwards. Bang! Ezra Zephyr crashed into the ground, eating a mouthful of soil. He ignored the pain, performing a tumble, before getting up. What met his eyes was an ancient world, as if he had been transported back to a prehistoric era. "Is this the Spirity Bailiwick?" the prince mumbled to himself as he gazed upon the ancient land before him. Ezra then regained his wits and gazed at his surroundings, trying to find his other subjects. It was at this moment that they heard a loud voice. "Listen well, O prided geniuses of Naren continent. You only have 1 hour to regroup. After 1 hour, the battle will be started. The battles will be recorded through the lens bees, these tiny bees born and die as a pair. The male has the function of recording while the female will project what is recorded at the same time. All you have to do is to fight. And get acknowledged, and your every action will be seen by all. There are hundreds of sects watching you, and being selected in any of them will be fruitful for your life. Killing is allowed, and personal grudges can also be solved here. Find your people, regroup and fight to make a name for yourself. There are 19,000 youngsters here, and all of them are bold to claim that they are geniuses. Now with that, the Spirity Bailiwick is officially begun. Oh. And one more thing, needless killing is prohibited. No clan would select a merciless slaughterer." The voice ended, and everyone was in a desperate situation. 1 hour, and the battle between maniacs will begin. The prince stretched his arms and yawned. "They will find me within an hour, I guess." At that time, Fenrir spoke. "This place, it smells familiar." "What do you mean?" asked Ezra. "Boy, do you know how this place came into existence?" "No, I didn't ask. Wait." Something came to Ezra's mind as he said. "I heard something from a passerby that this strange and rewardful place was caused by a 5th-tier beast." "A 5th-tier martial animal? How could a martial animal create something like this?" "No, that martial animal died and its gigantic dead body caused this change." The monstrous wolf of Norse stayed quiet for a while, before bursting into laughter. "Ha ha ha. Hey, don't tell me you lost your mind all of a sudden," retorted Ezra. Fenrir replied, "I just remembered something." "And what it is that our wannabe god remembered?" Ezra said as he lay on the ground. "Your ancestor was the one who killed that 5th-tier martial animal." Ezra's eyes widened. "What?" He jumped in surprise. At the same time, Ezra felt that something was getting closer at a very fast speed. He took out his short sword Efsa and held it in his right hand tightly. The fast approaching thing came out. Ezra looked at it. That thing was the Urgale arms. "Your Majesty. Are you all right?" asked the as he was panting. "Yes, I am. You did very well in finding me," remarked Ezra. "Thanks to your Majesty's tracking compass," said the as he raised his hand, which was holding a compass. There were small imprints on the compass, and it leaked mana. Zulfi looked at the compass in his hand. "His Majesty is in this way," said he, and dashed. Before he could run any further, he encountered someone. It was Salam Uquali, the genius of the second branch of the Uquali clan. "You, who are you?" asked Salam Uquali. "It's a question I want to ask," Zulfi Dimitri asked as he prepared himself. While the countless prided geniuses of the Naren continent flooded into the Spirity Bailiwick, no one knew that something important was happening in a certain far-off side outside the mist of Spirity Bailiwick. On a particular mountain, dazzling light was currently exploding from a peak top. One would see that an enormous spiritual imprint boundary had been inscribed into the ground. Astonishing undulations pulsed from it, gathering all of the surrounding spiritual energy. At this current time, 4 figures teleported to the center of this gigantic Genesis rune boundary out of nowhere. 3 were elders, while 1 was a youth. Extremely powerful spiritual energy rippled from the bodies as terrifying pressures suffocated the area. One of the 4 people, a bearded old man, said in a low voice, "Carlo, this continent is in the eyes of our gods. The Spirity Bailiwick has already been opened, and we will soon start to pour our chi until the tier appears and send you in. You are the most elite prided genius, trained since your birth, and your task will be to snatch away the greatest gift of the Spirity Bailiwick and be selected in a top sect. We must control this continent. Our gods in the upper realm desire it. If you succeed, your futures will definitely be limitless, and Sir Lapu Lapu will be happy." Another old granny in black said, "The Naren continent is a chaotic mess in comparison to other continents that are controlled by them. You are the most elite prided genius that we have spared no effort in nurturing. Therefore, you absolutely cannot lose to the geniuses from this lower realm continent." At that time, the spiritual imprint boundary quaked and 3 more figures arrived. One of the 3 newcomers inside the spiritual imprint boundary scratched the back of his head, displaying an innocent smile as he asked, "Dear elders, can you repeat everything you said to Carlo, please?" "Why are you here as well?" asked the elder. "To help Carlo." The 4 elders exchanged gazes before sighing, and they explained to the newcomers. The same newcomer asked, "Although there are no powerful factions in the lower realm, the envoys from the 7 sacred sects will be there. Will they accept us in their sects if they know we came from the upper realm?" The bearded elder answered in an indifferent tone, "The gifts and blessings of the world do not belong to any one person. If the geniuses of this Naren continent are incapable of securing the gifts offered to them, they will naturally be passed on to those with ability. That's why the 7 first-tier sects envoys will not say anything even if they find out. As long as you succeed, you will also naturally be able to enter the 7 first-tier sections." In the spiritual imprint boundary, a tall and slender girl waved her hand and nonchalantly said, "Relax, it's just a mere continent of the lower realm. We've already familiarized ourselves with their top geniuses, and they won't be much of a problem." The granny in black looked towards the center of the group where a young man in brownish loincloth stood. He had half-sleeved shirt, and this attire was strange and seemed to have traditional values. "Carlo, or, with the newcomers, you will serve as the leader on this mission, and everyone else will listen to your orders." The eyes of the youth in brown loincloth had been lightly shut since the beginning, only slowly opening after hearing the granny's words. Black pupils that seemed to contain pure calmness, an incomparably strange sight. He did not reply to the granny, but instead looked towards the other 3 geniuses with those pitch-black eyes as he said in a detached manner, "Regardless of whether it is the geniuses of the lower realm continent or you guys, whoever obstructs me will be killed." His tone was as ordinary as could be, containing neither emotion nor killing intent. When he spoke, however, the other elite geniuses shivered and unexpectedly did not retort. "Will you kill your brother as well, Carlo?" the tall lady said as he looked at the guys beside her. The third one who came had the same features as Carlo, brownish loincloth and sleeveless shirt, only he was less bulky and slightly different in features. No one answered her question, she scoffed and ignored them. Upon seeing that no one had anything to say, the youth in brownish loincloth lifted his head, looked outside of the spiritual imprint boundary and nonchalantly said, "Let's begin." The bearded old man and the other 3 nodded. With a wave of their sleeves, vigorous spiritual energy whizzed out and poured into the spiritual imprint boundary. It immediately began to shake as space started to twist and distort. While the space around them distorted, the 4 figures within the spiritual imprint on the ground gradually faded away. With one final burst of light, their figures completely disappeared. Upon seeing the 4 figures vanish, the bearded old man and his group finally breathed a sigh of relief. The Naren continent is nothing special, yet they possess such treasure called Spirity Bailiwick. We can't be blamed for having designs on it. Haha, relax. Carlo or and the other 3 are the most outstanding younger generation talents that are born for this task. With them in play, what can the geniuses of a tiny lower realm possibly amount to?" said another aged man. Yes, there will be no obstructions this time. As long as they manage to obtain the greatest gift, we might have our own continent in the lower realm. When that happens, we will get countless geniuses as they ascend to a higher realm and become a true behemoth-like existence in upper realm. What appeared before Ezra Zephyr and there was an endless antique land, ancient trees that reached into the sky, and hoary giant mountains that seemed to pierce the clouds. The entire land was filled with a powerful and barbaric aura. When one looked towards the sky, one would no longer see the swirling mist, but instead, a dim yellow hue that was clearly different from the outside world. I'm afraid that this Spirity Bailiwick exists in a different space, mumbled the Prince of Bloodfang to the This Spirity Bailiwick may perhaps be a tiny corner of the Naren continent, but the land reflected in his eyes was extremely vast. If one really had to compare, it may even be larger than the entire Naren continent. To think a dead body of a 5th-grade martial animal would become such a mystical land. Thar sighed. He truly wondered how strong the so-called 5th-grade martial spirit was that his body could transform into a world of its own. Some say a spiritual transformation stage expert died, while others claim that it was a 5th-tier martial animal. Which side is authentic? Asked Prince. No one can claim because it happened God knows when. I'll believe in 5th-tier martial animal 1, because that theory has more believers. The prince smiled as he listened to the intelligent Thurgale arm. It seems that some of our people will take some time to reach here, Ezra said after looking at the compass and scanned his surroundings, finding it completely empty and without a single soul in sight. It was more than obvious that no one except them was there. Looks like we'll have to get going alone, Ezra said and shook his head. He was not worried about them, he just wanted to reduce the casualties of precious 5th-grade spirit holders. Ezra did not hesitate for long, randomly choosing a direction as chaos force began to rise around him. With a stamp of his foot, his body shot forward and there followed. After traveling at full speed for about a dozen minutes, the prince's eyes suddenly focused. A lake had appeared some distance to his front. The werewolf prince concentrated, his expression involuntarily changing a split second later. He had discovered a figure standing by the lakeside. A giant bulky man and a dignified aura. Everything about the figure was just too domineering. It was a bearman, Ezra recognized the features. The man felt Ezra's presence and dashed. Within a split moment, he arrived near the prince, and his towering body looked down on Ezra. He wore a dress that had a noble family crest on it. "Bearman from Striped Beast Empire," said Ezra. "Are you, Ixtal Molarch?" asked Thur. "And you are," Ixtal said as his gaze fell on their crest and continued, "from Bloodfang Kingdom." So many people had been scattered, but they just had to encounter Ixtal Molarch. The bearman could not help but break out into a soft laughter that gradually grew louder and louder. After laughing for some time, he finally stopped, staring at the prince as he said, "Do you know what I was thinking about just now? I was thinking about where should I go to kill royal blood, and just as this problem was beginning to vex me, you decided to appear. Do you know what this means? It means that the crown prince of Bloodfang Kingdom will die at my hands. A fake prince of fake Beastmen Empire. There is only one true Beastmen country, and that's Striped Beast Empire, the rest are fakes." Ixtal stared at Ezra, a toying look in his eyes as if he was looking at prey that could not escape the palm of his hand. In response, Ezra simply chuckled. Thur's expression had turned rather grave as he gazed upon the toying look on Ixtal's face. Meeting the next chieftain of the Bearman tribe here was definitely not part of his plans. This was really quite unlucky. After all, the current him was completely outclassed. After all, Ixtal had a 6th-grade martial spirit. Hence, Thur's gaze flickered slightly for an instant, before the chi suddenly exploded below. Provocation. In a flash, it transformed into a blur of fire as it dashed forward, its sharp horns tearing through the air, viciously stabbing at Argus. Mud-type chi exploded from Argus's body as gauntlets shivered slightly. Deep silver light gathered at its knuckles, revealing an incomparable hardness. Punch of power. Argus's toes pushed off the ground as his body abruptly rocketed forward, and the two figures crossed above the stream. A silver-colored orc roared as it hammered its feet on the ground, creating a thunderous din. Berserk force exploded from its body, shaking the surrounding space. Its eyes fell upon the Prince of Bloodfang as it suddenly shot forward with a sudden stamp of its foot. It appeared above Ezra, and there in an instant, giant fists hammering downwards with power so wild that even cracks began to appear on the ground below. Ezra Zephyr did not dare to be negligent in the face of the silver orc's incoming attack. The big guy's strength had reached the early tier 2, plus it had a strong physical body, traits that made it a pretty tough opponent. Ezra's hand was swung, heavy as can be. The howling palm winds that accompanied it blasted away the air. This attack of his was similarly ferocious to the extreme. Boom! The two forces collided in the most violent manner. Black lightning bolts versus berserk force against each other, shockwaves immediately unfurled upon impact, causing cracks to extend along the ground while towering tree after tree was snapped at their waist. Countless falling leaves were instantly turned to dust. Ruhar! The silver orc's titanic body jerked, before being sent flying backwards, crashing into a cliff wall as it let out a painful yelp. The werewolf prince's body was also forced a dozen steps back, but what made his face turn a little grave, however, was the strange power contained within the force of the silver orc's attack that had stealthily exploded when they came into contact. He had suffered when they clashed earlier, the stealthy explosion making the force and blood in his body churn. This sort of power should be from some kind of skill or spell. There was amazement in their eyes. He could understand by Ezra's words that the reason why a mysterious power was hidden within the silver orc's attack was that it knew a particular skill or spell. Interesting, the prince said as his body rocketed forward. The Efsa and Dripa in his hands turned into numerous afterimages that filled the sky and began to engulf the silver orc. He was using them as whips with the help of Gleipnit, the chain. Cheer chewer. The images descended, piercing the silver orc's defenses, carving bloody scar after scar on its giant body. The poisonous Dripa slowed the orc's movements. Roar! The silver orc roared madly and suddenly slammed its heavy fists into the ground. A wave of berserk force immediately unfurled, shattering all of the hook and short sword images. Ezra's body drifted backwards. He looked at the now crazed orc as he suddenly extended a finger and lightly pointed. The silver orc's body abruptly froze. Soon after, it wailed. One could only watch as glowing purple liquid suddenly shot out of its body. The interior of its body had been completely destroyed by the invading venom, instantly wiping out its life force. One of the abilities of Dripa, invade. The hook's tip shook as the poison returned like birds to the woods. A martial animal like this was blessed with raw physical strength, but it lacked intelligence. This was why it had been unable to sense the invasion of the spreading venom. As the silver orc died, a thick stream of white rose from its body. The mist ball glowed and poured into Ezra. A smile emerged on Ezra's face as he felt the increasingly bountiful force in his body. The prince used soul absorption spell. Ezra mumbled to himself, I am already at the peak of the 5th level of the chi brightening stage. Only a single step separates me from the 6th level. While Ezra was delighted by the steady rise in his strength, he suddenly discovered that besides the stream of nature color ball, another glowing ball had also risen from the silver orc's corpse. The prince quickly walked forward while staring at the glowing ball, and there followed him, only to realize that it was a jade strip. Astonishment filled his face as he carefully grabbed the jade tile. The moment he did so, a name instantly rushed into his head. A body-type skill, explosive force. An explosive force can be melded into one's force attacks, amplifying its power. Thor was stupefied. He finally understood. The explosive force contained within the silver orc's force from earlier had originated from this skill, explosive force. How can a normal beast learn a cultivation skill? And the cultivation skill it knows can even become a jade strip after its death? Thor was dumbfounded for a long time, eventually shaking his head with a bitter smile. The reason behind all of this was likely somehow related to the Spirity Bailiwick. Ezra received the answer from Fenrir. Some say this place was created from a dead 5th-tier martial animal, and some also believe that Spirity Bailiwick was created from the blood of a spiritual transformation expert, and that same blood contained the various skills he had mastered over his lifetime. The martial animals and beasts here had likely inherited these skills at birth. After killing these martial animals or rare beasts, the skills and spells they knew would emerge in the form of a jade tile. A rush of excitement bubbled in Ezra's heart. He may not know what level a 5th-tier martial animal or a spiritual transformation expert was at, but it was clearly an unimaginable existence. The skills in the arsenal of such an existence were absolutely not limited to mere body type and low tier. There were likely destruction type and even control type skills. This means there may be martial animals that possess a destructive level of skills in the Spirity Bailiwick. A burning radiance blossomed in Ezra's eyes. However, the prince has estimated that given a grade 2 martial animal with a higher level of skill was already comparable to the core formation stage, a martial animal that knew a little more about skills would very likely reach grade 3, an existence comparable to the foundation establishment stage. One would likely need a meticulous plan to kill such a martial animal. Ezra Zephyr tossed and caught the jade tile as he said to himself, although this explosive force skill is helpful to me and it can amplify the power of my chaos force, but I should probably give it to someone who can earn more than me from this. Although its level was not that high, a cultivation skill like this that could amplify the power of one's chi and force was definitely not cheap. According to the Galarm's estimate, this skill has the worth and value of 1,000,000 spiritual crystals or more, but not less. Oh? Ezra's gaze suddenly turned towards the side and a pentagon was drawn there. The gigantic bear came out of it, the mad titan bear that had silenced a foundation establishment expert during the war. Ezra looked at the bear who was still enraged because of multiple deaths in previous battle. Take this, Caver, said Ezra as he tosses the jade tile towards the mad bear, and the bear quietly gazed upon the tile. Soon after, he went back inside the pentagon, with tile in his grip. At the exact same time, Ezra and Thur heard someone rushing, a heavy thing running. Without thinking much, Ezra first took the compass and looked at it. A soul figure jumped from the distance and flew towards the duo, but both were calm. Badam. With a labrys in hand, a female landed with heavy armor. She was none other than Shifapista. She knelt and said, "Your Majesty, forgive me for being late." "Stand up and take a breath," said Ezra. Just a few minutes after her, 21 people came from the same direction. They knelt when their sight caught the prince and said, "Your Majesty." "Huh." They panted like race dogs. They all gathered around Shifa using the compass and came towards their prince. Now, the confidence in them raised, 2 martial master with 6th grade martial spirit and 22 with 5th grade spirit. The swords collided at astonishing speed, a long sword against another sword. The clashes, which had the power to cut air itself, it was the fight between Zulfi Dimitri and Salam equally. "You low-life bloodfang bastard, you and your stupid prince are alike," uttered Salam in despise. Zulfi on the other side gazed at him with eyes full of bloodthirst. "Such a shame, a wannabe genius like you cannot even kill a lowlife like me. To be honest, I am wondering why our mighty prince spared you when you only have this much strength." "Well, maybe he wanted me to finish you." Salam was burning in rage. Chi bursted out from both of their bodies as they were about to clash once again. At that time, a third party intervened. A bee of hand size was yellow, and it had a strange reflecting object on its head. "You too, didn't you hear my announcement earlier that no fight is permitted for 1 hour? A loud voice resounded. Zulfi sheathed his sword behind his back and bowed in respect. "I seek forgiveness," he said, and took out the compass. After checking his destination, he dashed away. "Hey, wait," cried Salam. "You want to be disqualified?" The same voice resounded. As the bee rotated around Salam, the latter gritted his teeth before bowing. "Kindly, forgive my impudence," said the genius of Euquili's second branch. The voice didn't come. After waiting a while, Salam moved as well as he murmured to himself. "Just wait, I will kill every goddamned bloodfang martial master, just wait, all of you." The 1 hour time was completed and another announcement was made. The peacetime is over, you are free to fight, show us something interesting, and your future will be bright. Ezra paid no heed and clicked an imprint button on the compass and spoke. Time has completed, don't come to me if you are too far, find other Bloodfang martial masters nearer to you and form a group, survival is the priority. Don't hesitate to use your special tier armaments, show the whole continent the worth of Bloodfang Kingdom. The voice was heard by every single martial master via the compass. The compass was designed for tracking and voice messages. At that time Ezra felt a strange feeling inside his consciousness. Come out, he said, and a pentagon portal was formed, out of which the mad god bear came out. Just at that very moment, something came flying from the forest, something heavy. It was a strange eagle, its whole body was made of twinkling diamonds. The feathers were akin to pearl, beautiful and shining, its eyes were like rubies. It jerked its wings a bit, and a powerful force ripple pulsed from the wings as the shiny diamond-like feathers at its tip began to expand and lengthen. SWIISSSH. The eagle swung its wings as its feathers transformed into a long shiny whip that swept across the area. PHHRISSH. The air was blasted away with a cackle as the long shiny whip swept past. After a full round, the towering ancient trees in the vicinity were cleanly cut at their wastes, the interior smooth as a mirror. The feathers that made up the long whip shook again. In a split second, they had already dispersed, transforming into countless almost invisible thin feathers, which came straight for Mad God Bear. Chuch! Caver jumped and the ground beneath was poked full of innumerable holes so deep that it was impossible to see the bottom. The eagle's wings jerked and the countless shining feathers shot back towards him, returning to the wings. That's the razor pearl eagle, a second-tier martial animal. They said they are endangered in the book, mumbled the prince. A fire seemed to burn within Ezra's eyes as they gleamed brightly. At the same time, Mad God Bear, Caver, growled in anger. The razor pearl eagle was awakened because of Caver, his presence was a threat to its territory. In future fights, the flying martial animal like this eagle would surely make my opponents suffer, Ezra said to Caver as he signaled. Kill it. Just when Caver was about to retaliate, the razor pearl eagle vanished into the thick forest. Ezra sighed, he wanted to follow it but he decided not to. Instead, Mad God Titan furiously went after it. Though it was a little disappointing that such a martial animal was missed, Ezra didn't spend too much thinking and muttered to himself, I should hurry up and kill some martial masters, take their soul and martial spirit and strengthen myself such that my 5th level of Chi brightening stage breakthrough to 6th level. There was a great difference between levels and an insane difference between the Chi brightening stage and the core formation stage. Bluntly put, the Chi brightening stage was akin to laying one's foundations, while the core formation stage was where one was finally bestowed destructive powers. Only at the core formation stage would the spiritual energy in the body be allowed to freely leave and display its true might. Even though Ezra Zephyr was currently able to temporarily achieve a similar effect with the amazing monstrous wolf of Norse Fenrir as his martial spirit and chaos called Black Lightning as force, there was still a gap between this and the true core formation stage. Of course, the most direct and observable difference could be seen when he was traveling. Even when Ezra was in a rush, he could only leap and sprint, unable to achieve the feat of temporary flight-like abilities by using spiritual energy to support one's body. Thus, reaching the core formation stage was the most important goal for the current Ezra. He entered the Spirity Bailiwick so now he can break through to a higher stage. Spirity Bailiwick only allow Chi brightening stage experts to come in but one can break through inside. In the following few days, Ezra and his group swept across the area like a hurricane. Every mountain he passed was nearly turned upside down as ferocious beast after beast became victim to his assault. As he hunted, killed and devoured souls, Ezra could feel the chaos force in his body strengthen day by day, growing more abundant and powerful. However, there was one thing that baffled him, the feeling that he was going to break through to the next cultivation level still did not come to him. In a deep barren valley, corpses were scattered all over the ground, while Ezra and his group sat in the middle of the carnage. It was indeed as it looked. Bloodfang martial masters had discovered this valley half a day prior, which contained over 100 monkey-type beasts. Although the individual battle power of each monkey was less than a first-tier martial animal, their numbers made them an incomparably ferocious force. For Prince Ezra and his group, it had been a very good exercise. While the prince sat atop a boulder, strings of white mist came out from the dead bodies, turned into balls, and poured into his body. It was the spell named Soul Absorption. Ezra's eyes were closed as he concentrated on absorbing. After about an hour, he finally opened his eyes, but his brows involuntarily knitted together. The others quietly watched him. There was still no indication of an imminent breakthrough. Why? Ezra Zephyr mumbled, his eyes filled with confusion. It was not that he had not seen a practitioner at the peak of the chi brightening stage, but the gathered power inside his body clearly already far surpassed the 5th level of ordinary chi brightening stage experts. Normally speaking, after the spiritual energy reaches a certain level, it will break out and dash towards the center to form the core. With each level, the chi will move toward the core more frequently until it breakthroughs into the core formation stage, but why are there no signs of anything happening even after so long? Ezra was perplexed. He scratched the back of his head. It is so troublesome without Fenrir, he thought. Wait. Fenrir, you silly mutt. Ezra yelled inside his conscious. Boy, why are you behaving like a spoiled brat? Replied the wolf. You saw me struggling, but didn't care to tell me. Some things are for you to understand. You are no normal martial master, you are a special type of martial animal. Devour your own kind, brainless kobold. Ezra understood the words of Fenrir. He sighed before saying. After mulling over it for a whole day, it turns out that I've been tricked by my own unique type of force and martial spirit. After realizing this, Ezra could not help but let out a bitter chuckle. It seems that he had to first fill his body with martial animal souls or martial master souls. Even so, Ezra was a little excited. Since his breakthrough method was different from others, wouldn't it mean that the outcome would also be pretty special? As such, the subsequent few days of his schedule were packed with hunting and killing again, but with different prey. Time passed in this manner. Ezra grew more familiar with the Spirity Bailiwick, and began to meet several other martial masters of Bloodfang. Their total number was 57 now. Over this period of training, Ezra had begun to faintly feel that his force was finally about to reach its maximum capacity. He killed 2 weak cultivators in the meantime. Other than that he couldn't find any. The Spirity Bailiwick was humongous, and Caver couldn't find the Razor Pearl Eagle either. Not easy, huh? On a certain mountain, Ezra sighed as he shook his head. Any ordinary person would have long ascended to the 6th level of the chi brightening stage, while he was still stuck suffering at the 5th level of the chi brightening stage. It was akin to pregnancy lasting 10 months for others, while he just had to be pregnant for 3 whole years. He stood up, planning to cast himself back into the depths of the mountain. At this moment, however, he suddenly saw the numerous geniuses hunting in the vicinity abruptly begin heading down the mountain. Ezra was a little bewildered. He moved to stop one of them and asked, "What's going on?" The one who had been stopped revealed a look of impatience and was about to curse when he saw Ezra Zephyr. Boom. However, Ezra calmly sent out a punch. Black lightning berserked outwards, creating a space in the dense forests to their right. The one who had been about to curse immediately swallowed his words, and resentfully answered, "I just heard the news that a certain Razor Pearl Eagle was discovered in the mountains 300 miles from here. This particular martial animal is rumored to know a spell. Everyone in the area is currently heading there." Upon hearing the first part, a dazzling radiance instantly exploded from Ezra's eyes. He had been searching for that martial animal recently but had been unable to find it till now. He never imagined that he would finally encounter it today. He sent a message to all of the Bloodfangs who were a little away hunting their own to gather. An empty pocket of space lay at the foot of several mountains. This particular area was currently teeming with an activity today. Numerous figures were already gathered, while even more were streaming in from far away. This place had practically become a gathering point of sorts. When the Prince of Bloodfang Kingdom rushed over, he was stunned by the sheer number of people. This was the first time he had seen so many geniuses together ever since he entered the Spirity Bailiwick. Ezra Zephyr silently melded into the crowd and began to gather information about the Razor Pearl Eagle martial animal. After a dozen minutes or so, he consolidated his findings. It seemed that a group had first encountered the Razor Pearl Eagle deep within the mountains, and the entire party of 5 was nearly wiped out, leaving only one survivor behind. Each member of the group had the strength of the core formation stage, hence, it was deduced that the martial animal had definitely reached the peak of the second tier and was comparable to an early Foundation establishment expert. In addition, the fact that it knew 2 kinds of strange spells likely made its battle power even more overwhelming. News of this immediately drew numerous prided geniuses to this area. After all, everyone was aware by now that contained within the martial animal of the Spirity Bailiwick was an extremely good kind of spell pair, the spell that was very beneficial to any martial sorcerer. Although no one had managed to slay a second-tier martial animal yet, the eagle looked exhausted. However, the problem was that this second-tier martial animal known as Razor Pearl Eagle was not an easy opponent. Its strength was comparable to the early Foundation establishment after all. Did that eagle improve its martial prowess? Asked Ezra. And the wolf answered, most probably. While practically everyone here was only at the chi brightening stage with a very small number of core formation experts. A tiny slip was all it would take to end up being crushed to a bloody pulp by the second-tier martial animal. Thus, although many had already gathered here, no one dared to be the first to make a move after seeing numerous dead bodies. More importantly, the main attacking spell of Razor Pearl Eagle was based on long range. No one dared to close the gap. While so many geniuses had already gathered here. As the classic saying went, if there were many monks and only a little porridge, how would one divide the porridge? While these thoughts swirled in everyone's head, Ezra was smiling. For him, he was the only monk and the rest of the people here were porridge. All of a sudden, there was an uncommon disturbance in the crowd, and many people began surging towards the west. Ezra pondered a little before deciding to follow. Several figures proudly stood on a certain spot rather high up on the west side of the valley. The prince caught sight of a familiar face, it was Ixtal Molarch. The rest of the figures stood behind him, each wearing a prideful look on their face. Powerful spiritual energy surged around them, proof of their impressive might. Every one of them was an elite even amongst the prided geniuses here. Everyone, it is our blessing to have encountered this rare martial animal. As far as I remember, this is a Razor Pearl Eagle, this one is special, it has a spell. Since no one has taken the lead yet, our Spirity Beast squad has decided to hunt it together. Ixtal confidently swept his gaze around as he continued with a faint smile, if there are any like-minded friends here, you can choose to join our Spirity Beast squad. However, there is a restriction. Your strength needs to be at the core formation stage, or you won't be able to withstand a single blow from this second-tier martial animal even if you go. These words caused an outbreak of whispers from the crowd. The Bearman young lord had made himself very clear. The second-tier martial animal had been booked by their Spirity Beast squad. In other words, if they were able to kill the beast, the spell that will come out and its body with pure ancient spiritual energy will belong to them. Such actions were clearly tyrannical, but no one said anything. After all, it was practically asking a quick death for them to seek out that second-tier martial animal by themselves. However, someone finally spoke up from below, won't there be no benefits for us? Ixtal shot a look at a girl beside him. The latter displayed an enchanting smile as she answered, this second-tier martial animal is the king of this territory and its name is Razor Pearl Eagle. There is a high probability that it is leading one or more soars. The beasts from soars also possess a substantial amount of spiritual energy. Our Spirity Beast squad's mission is to kill the second-tier Razor Pearl Eagle, while we'll leave the leaderless beast soars to the rest of you. The spiritual energy from these beasts will naturally go to whoever manages to slay them. Alright, those whose strengths have reached the core formation stage can choose to join our squad. There is surely more than one spell or skill in the Spirity Bailiwick which we'll be going after one by one. Those that join us will definitely get a spell or skill. Her words shook the hearts of some of the stronger prided geniuses present. They were already well aware that with the exception of that select handful of super-elite prided geniuses, no one was able to kill a second-tier martial animal alone. The werewolf prince watched this with the detached eyes of a bystander. The fact that Ixtal Molarch had already begun to rope in others meant that Strike Beast Empire's martial masters had pretty good heads on their shoulders. If they were to succeed in this hunt, it was easy to imagine the subsequent rapid growth of their squad. In the end, they would gain the qualifications to vie with the super-elite geniuses through the power of numbers. Quite a number of individuals present were interested in joining the Spirity Beast squad. After all, once they were accepted, they would be able to borrow the power of the squad to martial animals and take their skills and spells. The only problem was the stringent requirement of reaching the core formation stage. Though the bar was high, there were still a few present who had reached it. Hence, those with the strength of the core formation stage began to walk towards Ixtal's group under the envious eyes of the crowd. The bearman from Strike Beast Empire exchanged a look with his other fellows when he saw this, pleased smiles emerging on their lips. Ixtal smiled and said in a low voice, "Looks like your idea is pretty good." The lady smiled faintly in response. "There are many gifts and blessings in the Spirity Bailiwick, but only the strongest of us have a shot at obtaining the best ones. Since we are just that tiny step lacking compared to those super geniuses, we need to borrow the power of others. As long as we succeed in growing our Spirity Beast squad, even our delusional prince and the other apex geniuses like him would not be able to stop us." The bearman nodded in approval. "However, once the squad has grown strong, you must remember to fulfill your promise." Lust flashed in the lady's long and narrow eyes. Ixtal Molarch chuckled. "Relax, after the Spirity Beast squad has strengthened, the first thing I will do is marry you. Once we kill the prince, we will send a message and my father will ignite a revolt against the Tigermen tribe. The current king is not worthy to lead the beastmen, people are tired of him and his offsprings are worse." The lady nodded in satisfaction. She naturally knew of the heinous deeds committed by the royal family of Strike Beast Empire. Hidden from the eyes and ears of the continent, a revolt was rising in the biggest beastmen empire, just like lion men revolted against werewolves 20 years ago. Now bearmen, who are proud of their power, were planning to overthrow the throne of tigermen. In the crowd, the Prince of Bloodfang coldly observed the now bustling crowd. The addition of each core formation stage expert slowly made the Spirity Beast squad grow stronger and stronger. Such a lineup might really lead to a successful hunt. Ezra's eyes faintly flickered. He cast a glance at Ixtal Molarch and suddenly laughed. There was already a feud between him and the other, and it could be said that they were already enemies. The prince was not someone who would stand by and do nothing as he watched his enemies grow stronger. The Spirity Beast squad was quickly organized. They now boasted a pretty good lineup consisting of 31 individuals, each possessing the strength of the core formation stage. The only one at the chi brightening stage in the group was that girl with Ixtal. Her name was Sky Lees. When all of them were gathered together, an intimidating aura could be felt, causing respect to rise in the eyes of the crowd around them. Ixtal Molarch had a look of satisfaction in his eyes. This lineup would be able to put up a fight even against an early Foundation establishment expert. Ixtal's gaze fell upon the group as he said with a grin, "Since all of you have chosen to join our Spirity Beast squad, you're now one of us. There are many gifts and blessings in the Spirity Bailiwick, and as long as we work at one, there will be nothing for us to fear." His speech was made with authority and confidence. As the next tribe leader of all bearmen, his status and reputation were plain for all to see, while also lending some weight to his words. Hence, no one gave any objections when he spoke and acted as their leader. Ixtal Molarch did indeed have the qualifications. "There's not much else for me to say. The first target of our newly established Spirity Beast squad is that Tier 2 martial animal. It is at the peak of the second tier. We must obtain victory to grow the reputation of the squad." The bearman leader did not beat about the bush. Although they had gained some elite members, whether or not these new members stayed on hinged upon their first battle. As long as they could pull off a beautiful victory, the name of their Spirity Beast squad would spread and attract even more elite geniuses. If this positive feedback loop continued, he would definitely gain the power to match the super elite geniuses. Thus, with a wave of his hand, he took the lead and flew off, while the new recruits of the Spirity Beast squad immediately followed. Spiritual energy surged as a group of 30 core formation experts leapt into the air, an impressive sight indeed. Even more of the surrounding onlookers also followed like a swarm of locusts. Many of them knew that although they would not be able to enjoy the spoils from the second-tier martial animal and its powerful spells, they could still take advantage of this opportunity to kill the eagle beast soar that followed the razor pearl eagle. Ezra's gaze flickered faintly as he watched the exodus and seamlessly melded into the crowd. The large group swept through the mountain range like an unstoppable tsunami, easily cutting through every beast in their path. After an hour, they reached the depths of the mountain range. A high-spirited youth called Ixtal led the Spirity Beast squad, standing on a hill as he looked to his front where an enormous mountain valley lay. The valley was dyed in a silver-black luster, while the howling wind carrying muffled sharpness originated from within. By this time, the eagle beast soars that were originally stationed outside the valley had already been cleaned up. That second-tier razor pearl eagle is in this valley. Fear flitted across Skylisa's face as she gazed into the depths of the valley. If not for their numbers, none of them would dare to provoke the second-tier martial animal. Let alone the fact that this second-tier martial animal knows spells. Behind Ixtal, one of the core formation stage members said, "Squad leader, I don't think any of us will be able to withstand the surging force and powerful spells of this razor pearl eagle." The others nodded. 30 core formation martial masters might seem impressive, but a single mistake was all it would take for their entire group to be wiped out by a single spell. The bearman smiled faintly and replied, "If it does use the spells, I will naturally have a way to deal with it." The sight of his confident appearance made the others secretly breathe a sigh of relief. If Ixtal had been planning on paying for victory with their lives, none of them would accompany him any further. Fortunately, it seemed that Ixtal did live up to his status as second genius of Stripe Beast Empire, and had some powerful trump cards in his arsenal. The title of first genius of Stripe Beast Empire belonged to the Prince of the Empire, a tiger man who was also participating in Spirity Bailiwick. Ixtal instructed, "Prepare to draw out the razor pearl eagle as planned." One of the members responded and began to very carefully approach the mountain valley. Kiriririkaka. When the Spirity Beast squad scouting member neared the valley, an ear-piercing high-pitched screech rang out from within. The screech was akin to a sharp sword, violently gashing the sides of the valley. The core formation stage scouting member turned deathly pale, with no hesitation whatsoever as he turned and fled. SWIISSHH. However, the moment his body turned around, a lambency of lustrous globule shot out from the valley and appeared right behind him in a flash. A twinkling ball descended, it spread its wings as the sharp claw struck the scouting member of the Spirity Beast squad. BANNG. A muffled sound rang out and the scouting member vomited a mouthful of blood. His body crashed into the ground like a cannonball, creating a deep pit. No one knew whether he was dead or alive. Kririk. Only at this moment was everyone finally able to get a clear view of the creature. It was a giant of an eagle, a dozen feet tall, while the diamond glinted around its body. Its body flew high and glorious in the sky, but its ruby-like eyes was awe-inspiring. The pearl-like feathers was solid and sharp. The martial animal of second tier, razor pearl eagle revealed itself. Keen force undulations pulsed from its body, shaking the surrounding space. An astonishing and ferocious aura filled the area. The expressions of the crowd watching from far away could not help but change as some of them involuntarily stepped back. The aura of a martial animal at peak of second tier was too unbearable for them. Ixtal's expression had also turned a little graver. He did not back down, however, but instead made a grabbing motion and a long dim red axe appeared in his hand. Small sharp pebbles seemed to float from the surroundings and attach to the axe, making it slightly bigger and sharper. With the axe in his hand, Ixtal's aura seemed to steadily rise. It's the earth-shattering axe. A special grade weapon of the Bearman tribe that can only be used by the head of the tribe. Never imagined that the current head would bestow the position of the chieftain to his son. With the help of a special grade armament, the victory is secured. Whispers spread in the mountain forests. Ixtal's rapidly rising aura made the other Spirity Beast squad members regain their wits. They immediately gritted their teeth and retrieved their weapons. Chi and mana surged, showing that every weapon had reached a unique grade. Formidable aura after aura began to rise, drawing the Razor Pearl Eagle's attention as the wind around it intensified. Kirariri. It screeched, treading on the wind as it transformed into a sparkle of light that bolted straight for Ixtal. It could also sense that the latter's threat towards it seemed to be the greatest of the bunch. Biz. The charge of a second-tier martial animal was extremely intimidating, wind and light blasting at the air around it. The Bearman did not panic as he watched the menacing Razor Pearl Eagle rapidly approach. Instead, he waved his hand, signaling for everyone to scatter while he remained where he stood. The shiny feather whip cracked, slicing the mountain top Ixtal was at. Swissh. The entire mountain received a huge gash, the top was cleanly cut. The ferocious charge of the Razor Pearl Eagle was practically akin to a natural disaster. Swoosh. Ixtal's figure jumped into the air as he clenched his fist. Everyone watched as a ball of steel appeared in his hand, the steel ball, which seemed to be covered in profound and mysterious patterns. The ball in Ixtal's hand fell down, transforming into a deep yellow spiderweb that fell from the sky and landed on the Razor Pearl Eagle's enormous body. The web rapidly solidified the moment it came into contact with the second-tier martial animal. It seemed to be insanely heavy, instantly suppressing the martial animal's speed. Creech, cree-ike. The Razor Pearl Eagle screeched madly, wind and light arcing across its body. However, the scattered web immediately regrouped as if it was an immortal entity. In a split second, Ixtal had displayed one of his cards, restricting the Razor Pearl Eagle's most troublesome speed. Ezra's pupils shrank when he saw this scene and his expression became a little graver. That web, it seems to be the Mystic Subduing Web? Mystic Subduing Web was a kind of imprint treasure. It was not easy to manufacture, very pricey, and a one-time use item. Ixtal's item likely cost several 100,000 spiritual crystals. Once one came in contact with the web, not only would it feel as if there was a heavy mountain on one's back, but one would also need to constantly disperse the web using one's spiritual energy. If the web was allowed to grow, it would eventually cover one's entire body, creating a web prison. The Prince of Bloodfang Kingdom muttered to himself, that musclehead has really made ample preparations. In fact, it seems that they are highly likely to succeed in hunting this second-tier Razor Pearl Eagle. Soon after, he softly chuckled. A situation like this was something he was more than happy to see. A one-sided slaughter by the Razor Pearl Eagle was boring after all, and a close fight between the sandpiper and the clam was exactly what a fisherman like him needed to strike at the most optimal opportunity. Kirariri. The Razor Pearl Eagle's screech was akin to needles in ears. The blinding force of martial animal violently pulsed from its body in waves, continuously scattering the seemingly endless web. It could sense that if left alone, the web would expand up and eventually trap it. Everyone, don't hold anything back. A sneer appeared on Ixtal's face as he gazed at the Razor Pearl Eagle, whose speed had been restricted. A martial animal was a martial animal after all, even though they are smarter than normal beasts, they did not possess much intelligence or they would not have succeeded so easily. The other Spirity Beast squad members were overjoyed by this scene as a surge of confidence rose in their hearts. Ixtal's Mystic Subduing Web had practically half the beast's power. Attack together! The 30-core formation stage experts shouted together, powerful spiritual energies erupting from their bodies as the unique grade items in their hands gleamed sinisterly. BBBRRRR. The ground rumbled as they shot forward, making sure not to come too close as they fired off various chi skills and mana spells that endlessly bombarded the second-tier Razor Pearl Eagle. Boom, kapak. Powerful attacks landed on the Razor Pearl Eagle's body, forcing it back step by step. The martial animal was furious, wind and twinkling light wildly raging around its body, the sharp whip of feathers slashed, as it dashed forward and attempted to swipe at the humans. However, due to the mystic subduing web that was bogging it down, the humans were able to avoid its attacks. While the eagle was focused on the bombardment from the group, Ixtal found an opportunity to appear behind it, rocks cleaved into thin pebbles and attached at the edge of the axe. Flowing along the earth-shattering axe as it strikes forward like a rock-made giant chopper. PPCCCHHH. The earth-shattering axe tore open a deep and bloody wound on the razor pearl eagle's tough body, spiky pebbles continuously tumbling towards the wound. Kiriri. The sudden pain caused the razor pearl eagle to screech as a diamond-like feather whip was sent hacking down at Ixtal, the powerful force slicing even the ground below. The bearman drifted away on his chi like cotton willow in the breeze, avoiding the razor pearl eagle's sharp whip. He hovered in the vicinity of the second-tier martial animal, darting in to attack from time to time. Every attack deviously targeted the martial animal's openings, borrowing the power of the special great earth-shattering axe to gorge bloody wound after wound on its body. The other members of the squad continued to blast the razor pearl eagle with an endless stream of attacks from some distance away. The situation was clearly under the Spirity Beast squad's control. Even further away, the owners of the numerous gazes that had their attention on this area could not help but sigh in admiration. Ixtal was a capable individual indeed. Ezra also nodded his head in acknowledgement. Although the Muscleheads group is well prepared and holds the numbers advantage, I believe that it won't be so easy to kill a second-tier martial animal. Nothing is scarier than a wounded beast, mumbled Ezra. His perceptive eyes could see that even though the razor pearl eagle looked to be in a pretty sad state, this was practically nothing to its strong body. The mystic subduing web was admittedly very troublesome, but it may not be able to fully restrict the movements of the second-tier martial animal who is at peak. Kerrai. As these thoughts flashed in Ezra's head, the state of the battle suddenly took a turn. With a screech, a gleam of light frantically jumped out from the razor pearl eagle's body as if stimulating it. Its body swiftly began to grow, eventually reaching a height of dozen feet, now towering over everyone like a little mountain. Kikakarikakakakak. The mystic subduing web that had been stuck to its body was completely destroyed, falling from its body like a thread. SWIAISSSH. The enormous body of the razor pearl eagle that had now regained its speed appeared behind a few of the squad members. Cruelness flashed in its eyes as the feathers suffused with wind and sparkle slashed downwards, ripping apart the air. PPIACCCHHU. The bodies of 5 geniuses were shredded as blood-curdling shrieks rang out. The crowd that was dealing with the other eagle soars far away felt their scalps turn numb. Hunting the second-tier martial animal was indeed akin to walking on the edge of a blade. Even core formation stage cultivators and third-circle sorcerers could be killed in an instant. Bastard bird. Ixtal's complexion turned ashen. The twinkling type of force raged around the martial animal, its ruby eyes overflowing with savagery. Its gaze swiftly locked onto Ixtal, the spiritual energy in its body suddenly beginning to churn as a terrifying aura pulsed. It's going to use something on large scale. Upon seeing this scene, the remaining geniuses from the Spirity Beast squad cried out in terror, no longer caring about anything else as they hurriedly retreated. The razor pearl eagle's huge beak opened, its whole body glimmered and wind frantically gathered around it. A pulse swept outwards, shaking the surrounding space. Kreee. In the next instant, a foot-wide wind ball, tinged with a myriad of colors, was formed in the martial animal's mouth. Different colors rampaged within the ball while the wind howled, the two constantly clashing forces making a thunderous din. SWOOSSSSH. The glistening colorful wind ball shot out like rushing thunder. In a flash, it had already appeared in front of Ixtal. Fear flashed in the eyes on which the glistening colorful wind ball was reflected, but he quickly gritted his teeth and pulled out the claw-carved pendant hanging from his neck. Ancient and mysterious patterns had been embedded into the claw-carved pendant. A pained look emerged on his face as he looked at the pendant, before suddenly snapping it between his fingers. BIIZZZZZ. Rays of light blossomed from the pendant, creating a staunch giant bear of light in front of him. The bear looked weak, but faintly gave off an astonishing presence. Raawr. The bear roared, and a glistening colorful wind ball arrived, slamming into the staunch young bear. Boom. Dreadful shockwaves unfurled, instantly flattening the entire valley and the surrounding forests. The Prince of Bloodfang Kingdom avoided the shockwaves. He gazed at the now empty land before him as his expression turned grave. Is this the power of a second-tier martial animal? Frightening indeed. The previous spell that Eagle used on Caver doesn't even come close. Ezra's gaze flickered in thought. The current attack was not a spell, but a high-level skill. It was a gamma layer skill. The other super elite geniuses likely already possessed one in their arsenal. Hence, Ezra mentally raised the danger levels of these super elite geniuses once again. A look of satisfaction could be seen on his face. The prince decisively declared, I need one too, or it would be far too disadvantageous for me in a real fight. The emotion-based skill given by Fenrir has hard as hell requirements to learn. He lifted his head and looked in Ixtal's direction as his eyes narrowed slightly. This muscle-head bearman is better than I thought, he has so many treasures to protect himself. The strange bear shield that had appeared in front of Ixtal previously was likely a one-time use imprint treasure. Or it would not have been capable of defending against the Razor Pearl Eagle's gamma layer skill. The dust dispersed, revealing an unscathed Ixtal, and everyone breathed a sigh of relief. The tall bulky bearman's expression was rather grim, mostly due to the pain from losing the pendant. It had been bought for him by his father at an extravagant price and could withstand a full power blow from a Foundation establishment stage expert. But everything will be worth it as long as we kill this martial animal and obtain its gamma layer skill and third circle spells. Ruthlessness flitted across Ixtal's eyes. As he gazed at the screeching Razor Pearl Eagle, he suddenly made a grabbing motion with his hand and a strange brownish seed appeared within. The brownish seed was thrown out, disappearing into the ground upon contact. BBZZZZZZ. The ground began to shake at this moment. One could only watch as the area beneath the flying Razor Pearl Eagle began to fracture. Countless spikes shot out, forming an earth prison of spikes that trapped the second-tier martial animal. These earth spikes were exceedingly sharp, and even the Razor Pearl Eagle was cut till it was now drenched in blood. Moreover, a huge suction force had emerged from the ground, slowing the eagle's flight and forcing it to descend. Kill it. Ixtal wasted no time. With a wave of his hand, he led the remaining geniuses to attack, ruthlessly targeting the martial animal's weak points. In an instant, the Razor Pearl Eagle had fallen into a precarious situation. From the looks of it, it was going to be slowly attacked to death. Ezra Zephyr could not help but sigh when he saw this. How materialistic. The brownish seed from earlier was another imprint material on which a one-time use spiritual imprint boundary had been inscribed. It seems that Ezra Zephyr disliked the too much usage of materials, but at the same time, he was aware that what Ixtal did was the best decision. Fortunately, the Razor Pearl Eagle had helped the former scout out the latter's entire hand. Otherwise, even Ezra would have been tricked by this Bearman Next Lord's seemingly endless trump cards. It should be about time, right? The prince stood up, smiling slightly as he continued to watch the ongoing fight. Ixtal was practically tearing out his lungs. It seems that it is finally time for me to make an appearance. Boom, Kabawak. The sound of spiritual energy blasting something continuously rang out in the remains of what was once a forest. Sharp earth spikes shot out of the ground one after another, gleaming with an icy sharpness. Blood dripped from the Razor Pearl Eagle's enormous beautiful body as it struggled within the earth spike array. Its mutilated flesh was a clear sign that it had been gravely injured. However, the Spirity Beast squad was not doing too well either. Although Ixtal had used numerous trump cards to injure the Razor Pearl Eagle, it was still a peak second-tier martial animal that was comparable to an early Foundation establishment expert. Hence, its crazed counterattack had torn genius after genius to pieces. The entire battlefield was an extremely wretched sight. Quick, it's about to fall. Howled Ixtal Molarch. The confidence from before was no longer present as his tired eyes locked onto the desperately struggling Razor Pearl Eagle. He had used practically all of his trump cards in this hunt, a state akin to gambling till one was left in only underwear. Upon hearing his howl, the Spirity Beast squad members drummed up one final surge of energy, madly bombarding the nearly spent martial animal with the last ounce of spiritual energy they could muster. As he watched the situation gradually tip in their favor, Ixtal finally breathed a sigh of relief as if a heavy burden had been lifted from his shoulders. Ecstasy and excitement were no longer concealable on his face. Though the battle today had been a bitter one, he had finally emerged as the victor. It was easy to imagine how his name would soon spread, making his reputation no less than the prince of his empire or any of the other super elite geniuses. The Spirity Beast squad would have also proven themselves, making it easier to recruit more members and grow their reputation, eventually allowing them to become a tyrant-like existence in the Spirity Bailiwick. When that happened, Ixtal Molarch would have the power to vie with the super elite geniuses. While the bulky bearman was fantasizing about the future, he did not notice that a figure had stealthily slipped into the chaotic battlefield. The figure was naturally Ezra. No one had noticed him due to the chaos. He watched the Razor Pearl Eagle's injuries grow worse and worse under the seemingly endless waves of attacks as his eyes flashed in thought. He could not allow Ixtal and his squad to kill the beast. Otherwise, how would he become the fisherman that reaps everything in the end? Hence, his figure suddenly shot forward, making it seem as if he was aggressively charging at the martial animal. Boom. However, although the Razor Pearl Eagle was heavily injured, it was still full of ferocity. A sharp feather was sent flying towards him, forcing the prince to dodge and retreat. At that time Ezra threw something. No one saw the tiny shadow that had flown out of his sleeves and landed on a certain spot on the spiritual imprint boundary. Within the shadow was a scroll, a spiritual imprint scroll, to be more precise. A ray of light exploded from the spiritual imprint scroll at this moment. Although it was not large, it just so happened to cover a certain area at the center of the spiritual imprint boundary that captured the martial animal with spikes. Crackk. A faint crack was suddenly heard. The seemingly infinite sharp stone spikes gradually came to a stop, while the suction force that had trapped the Razor Pearl Eagle abruptly disappeared. The disappearance of the suction force initially stunned the eagle, but a creature as quick as it soon realized what had happened. It immediately released a screech as its battered body shot forth, shredding two individuals with a swipe of its wings. The spiritual imprint boundary has been broken. Someone finally discovered that something was wrong as a horrified piercing cry escaped. The members of the Spirity Beast squad that had originally been about to charge at the eagle immediately did a 180, beating a hasty retreat and no longer daring to approach. Although the beast was gravely injured, it still had the power to easily kill any of them. The bearman's expression changed drastically as he hurriedly yelled, "Don't be afraid. It's already on the verge of death. Stop it quickly, we cannot let it escape." He could already see that the Razor Pearl Eagle had escaped their encirclement, and was planning on fleeing. However, his yells were of little use. Many had died, while the threat of death had already been thoroughly beaten into the rest. Kriyurururika. By borrowing this tiny gap, the Razor Pearl Eagle's shiny body suddenly shot into the sky, all the remaining twinkling wind force swirling around its body as it transformed into a flash of light that dashed into the vast mountain range. Useless trash. All of you are useless trash. Ixtal flew into a rage, no longer able to restrain himself after seeing the second-tier martial animal escape. He had practically used up every trump card in his arsenal to hunt the eagle, trump cards that would have allowed him to briefly vie with the super elite geniuses. Moreover, the extremely pure spiritual energy from killing the second-tier Razor Pearl Eagle may have been his chance to reach the from early to mid of the first stage of core formation stage, or even enable him to reach the peak of first level. Unfortunately, everything had gone up in flames. Skylise arrived behind Ixtal, a rather ugly look on her pretty face. They had paid such a steep price, but it had all been for naught. Ixtal roared at the Spirity Beast squad members. His body started to change into beast form as he said, "Idiots! Chase after it! In response, indignant looks appeared on the squad members' faces. They had only chosen to join because of Ixtal's promise that he would be able to deal with the second-tier martial animal, but look at how many had been injured or killed. They were practically using their lives in exchange for results. Humph, even if we do kill that razor pearl eagle, the first person to benefit would be you. Why should we pay for your benefits with our lives? This little lord will no longer stay in your spirity beast squad. One of the more irritable individuals coldly snorted, ignoring Ixtal's ugly expression as the former turned around and left. Now that someone had taken the lead, more and more members left one after another. Of the Spirity Beast squad's originally grand lineup, only a few lonely figures remained. This sight infuriated Ixtal so much that he nearly morphed into bear form and attacked them. The young lord controlled his anger somehow. Things had turned out very differently than he had expected. He could not figure it out. Why had the originally stable situation slipped out of control so suddenly? While Ixtal was hopping with rage, Ezra's figure quietly slipped deeper into the mountains, his gaze fixed towards a certain direction. He knew that the heavily injured razor pearl eagle would definitely draw numerous coveting eyes. In fact, some of those originally watching from far away may even begin to entertain certain thoughts. However, the razor pearl eagle was extremely quick. It would not be easy to find it again in the vast mountain range. Even so, the prince had made his preparations. When he moved earlier, he had secretly left behind some tracker on the eagle without anyone realizing, allowing him to track it. Hence, he pushed his speed to the limit as he dashed through mountain after mountain. His chase lasted a whole 4 hours. As the saying went, the heavens do not let down those who are determined. When the prince arrived at the top of a certain hill and cast his gaze into the distance, he saw a familiar giant eagle by the lakeside, weakly lying in a pool of blood. This scene caused the werewolf prince to breathe a sigh of relief as if a heavy burden had been relieved from his shoulders. "Found you, at last, my dear second soldier." The prince gazed at the giant glowing bird lying by the lakeside. The latter was drenched in blood, its force rapidly weakening, clear signs that it had sustained life-threatening injuries. Spirity Beast Squad is indeed rather capable. Ezra sighed. Someone incapable would not have been able to force a second-tier razor pearl eagle to such a pitiful state. However, no matter how capable the Bearman young leader and his squad were, the fruits of his labor were destined to be plucked by the werewolf today. The prince tightened his grip around the invisible thread-like chain and swung the well-founded short sharp sword rapidly. There was no hesitation whatsoever as he shot forward, heading straight for the gravely injured beast. Kiriri. The razor pearl eagle immediately sensed the dangerous lightning force. It assumed that another martial animal is attacking and released a weak roar of anger. Its giant mouth opened as wind and sparkling spewed out, viciously blasting towards the prince. However, the razor pearl eagle was heavily injured and had exhausted almost all of its spiritual energy, hence, it did not even have a tenth of its original power. Therefore, the attack was shattered with a single sweep from Ezra Zephyr's sword, Efsa. Upon seeing that the situation did not bode well for it, the second-tier martial animal began to flee again. "Where do you think you're going?" The Prince of Bloodfang Kingdom laughed as the glypnet in his hand jerked. The almost invisible chain gave a faint yellow hue, becoming a light yellow whip with a blurry purple end, wrapped around the razor pearl eagle's wings. The poisonous hook Dripa emitted a purple aura as its small sharp and strong blades stuck on the diamond-like wings of razor pearl eagle. After binding it, Ezra swung his other hand, the same chain but the end of it had a hazy aura of blue. The sharp Efsa attached with glypnet descended as it tore the air. The razor pearl eagle cried as wind and light began vibrating from its twinkling body. Unfortunately, it was unable to blast away the hook called Dripa. The prince leapt into the air, landing on the martial animal's head. There was no hesitation whatsoever as he clearly showed Efsa to the eagle. The sharpness was felt by the trapped martial animal. "You have suffered a lot, take a rest now. Leave the rest to me, your master." A stab containing chaotic black bolts dug into the razor pearl eagle's head, piercing it and extinguishing the beast's life. Dhhanng. The second-tier martial animal's enormous body powerlessly crashed to the ground, causing the surrounding area to shake and ripples to appear on the lake. Ezra kept the pulled out Aoife as his eyes began blazing with anticipation. Just when the razor pearl eagle's life force faded, 2 wisps of shining mist began to rise from its body. There were 2 things, a shining tile and a glittering book. As expected of a martial animal that was at the peak of 2nd tier, the spiritual energy from it is so much more abundant than the beasts from before. The prince sighed in praise. He had only gained a strand of soul power from the beasts he had hunted previously. In comparison, there was more than 10 times the amount from the razor pearl eagle. Ezra could feel it even without absorbing it. Bright light discontinued to rise, ultimately gathering into 2 things, a book and a tile. The bright tile gradually began to shrink, transforming into a white tile that was the size of a hand. The same goes for the book. The tile seemed to contain a sea of shining clouds, and was very pretty. The book was icy in color and had a feather of razor pearl eagle attached to it. The vigorous spiritual energy that pulsed from it made Ezra's mouth wide in a grin. The prince controlled the corners of his mouth. He had the feeling that his 5th level would finally be fully filled after he absorbed the soul of this strong bird and can enter the 6th level. When that happened, he would be able to take that final step of breaking through the 7th level of the chi brightening stage and then ascend to the core formation stage. The prince took in a deep breath, suppressing his surging excitement. He very carefully grabbed the book that contained the 3rd circle whipping spell and tile which possessed the gamma layer skill and kept it in his cave bracelet. After doing this, his eyes began to light up with excitement again as he said, "Soul absorption spell." A white circle formation was drawn. The prince smiled as he watched another wisp of glowing mist rise from the razor pearl eagle's body and transform into a ball. His soul color is different. Ezra's hand shot out like lightning, grabbing the ball as his eyes boiled with excitement. The moment he touched it, the ball got absorbed inside his hand. The prince closed his eyes to better digest the soul. While Ezra was focusing on absorbing the soul, the air suddenly trembled as the piercing sound of something fast rang out. A deadly chi whizzed towards him from behind, heading straight for his head at a crafty angle. Ezra's response was not slow. The Gleipnit jolted in his hands as the Efsa and Dripa transformed into 2 deadly strings that went straight towards the incoming attack with evil intentions. Bizzz. A smoke-type midnight black chi hit the sword and hook, forcibly throwing them backwards. However, it used up its energy and received the same counter from the duo armaments. Its power diminished and revealed that it was a javelin. The prince turned his gaze around, his eyes locking onto a certain mountaintop nearby, where several figures were currently standing. The 2 in front were Ixtal Molarch and Skylise. "So you are the reason behind everything." Ixtal Molarch's expression was exceptionally ugly, killing intent surging within his eyes as he darkly glared at Ezra Zephyr. How could he not realize by now why such problems had occurred earlier? The werewolf prince had for sure secretly done something that allowed that razor pearl eagle to escape their encirclement. Beside Ixtal, the female's face was not a pretty sight either as she laughed icily and said, "So it was you, the crippled prince of a fake beastman empire. What a good fisherman you are, patiently waiting for the martial animal and us to exhaust each other." The bearman's gaze was both icy and eerie as he stared at the next king of werewolves and said, "If not for the mystic subduing web that was left on the razor pearl eagle, you may even have succeeded." He extended his hand to the prince, his tone indifferent as he continued, "If you understand, hand over the things you obtained from the razor pearl eagle. You don't deserve to enjoy any of these things." The prince laughed when he heard this. He rubbed his cave bracelet that had a wolf embedded in it, and the grimoire and tile appeared in his hands. "Are you talking about them?" Ixtal greedily stared at the grimoire and tile. Ordinary beasts only had a strand of spiritual energy in their bodies, while the razor pearl eagle's spiritual energy was tremendous, and apart from that, that martial animal gave the gamma layer skill that every cultivator fancy. "Hand it over," said Ixtal. Ezra Zephyr tossed the grimoire and tile and performed a jugglery as he revealed a strange smile to Ixtal Molarch and Skylise. In the end, with a gentle flick, both grimoire and tile sucked back into the bracelet and vanished, it happened so fast that others couldn't see. The Spirity Beast squad was stunned. A split second later, a twisted expression abruptly rose on Ixtal's face. He roared, "Bloody werewolf! I'm going to kill you!" Ixtal had used up so many trump cards in order to exhaust the martial animal. Who could have imagined that it would end up benefiting Ezra Zephyr? "Kill him!" howled Ixtal. Behind him, several core formation stage-prided geniuses looked at Ezra with hostility. However, the prince ignored them. He did a backflip, disappearing into the lake as a faint voice echoed, "Musclehead, this is your only chance to kill me, you will regret later for not hunting me now." When Ezra jumped, the dead body of Razor Pearl Eagle vanished as well, stored in his cape bracelet. Ixtal paid no heed and dashed towards Ezra. At that very moment, Ixtal and his squad felt powerful entities coming towards them. He halted and prepared himself for every possible scenario. Several dozen figures landed before Ixtal, blocking the path that leads to where Ezra jumped. Eyes of Ixtal widened when a familiar face came and uttered, "Stop right there." The one who spoke was the Urgale Arms. His loyal crescent short swords glimmered as he unsheathed them. But the eyes of Ixtal were fixed on the lady in armor. Out of all, she seemed to wield the highest power. When Ezra ordered them to come, they paid no heed and came straight towards him. When the Spirity Beast squad was busy in a fight, the Bloodfang's martial masters reached Ezra. "Your Majesty, what are your orders?" asked Shafa. Ezra stared at the 56 martial masters and asked, "Why you haven't reached at core formation stage yet? All of you were already at peak of the 7th level of the Chi brightening stage." Hearing the question, every one of them looked at each other. "Why are you silent?" the prince asked again. "Your Majesty, we had decided that none of us will break through before you reach the core formation stage," answered the prince squinted his eyes. "And why is that?" "Because if we break through before our prince, others will find a reason to mock you, Your Majesty," said as he lowered his head. Ezra facepalmed. "How more stupid can you be? Get lost now, show your face when you reach at core formation stage." After saying that, Ezra changed his gaze to inspect the battle. They were already at the peak and were able to break through long ago, but they intentionally controlled the Chi to not ascend to a higher stage before their prince. The martial master exchanged a look and moved away after bowing to their prince. That was the reason they came so late. Currently, only 27 of them managed to break through and quickly came. The rest were in the process. All 27 of them were at the core formation stage. Ixtal and the rest were bewildered. "I have gathered around 30 core formation experts from different kingdoms, and few are even independent martial masters. How that single devastated Bloodfang kingdom got so many geniuses? Something is not right." The bearman pondered. Meanwhile, Ezra was seated on a rock inside of a cave, his eyes lightly shut. The soul of Razor Pearl Eagle he had swallowed previously had already landed in his core and was currently giving off a seemingly endless stream of spiritual energy that was ultimately refined by Fenrir. Ezra could feel the spiritual energy in his body, growing more and more abundant as black bolts viciously thundered. "It should be about time for the breakthrough," mumbled the prince to himself. He opened his eyes and cast a glance at the cave entrance which he had blocked with a giant rock. He believed that this was enough to ensure his safety. There was no way that Ixtal would let this matter rest, and he would definitely lead a search in the cave area. However, there were trusted subjects of the Bloodfang kingdom facing him, and the Spirity Beast squad won't be able to pass them. The prince let out an icy chuckle. Without any further hesitation, he closed his eyes again and turned his attention towards the soul absorption, controlling the devouring power of Fenrir to devour every strand of Razor Pearl Eagle's powerful soul. The surging chaos force around him began to rise steadily. At the same time, Ixtal gazed at the vast area behind the Bloodfang martial masters, his expression white with anger. They were ready to engage with them. He knew that the current Spirity Beast squad is exhausted and the opponents are in top condition. "Bastards!" Cracking sounds emerged from Ixtal's fists, the rage in his heart on the verge of making him turn crazy. This was the first time he had been toyed with in such a manner, and it was even by a chi-brightening stage trash. No need to worry, he cannot hide for long. Skylise consoled from the side. A vicious look flashed in her eyes as she said, "We can spread the news that Bloodfang Kingdom has obtained the treasures of a peak second-tier martial animal. They are very few in numbers, and I'm sure that many people will soon become interested in them. They will eventually become the enemies of every genius in Spirity Bailiwick." Ixtal suppressed his anger, his eyes narrowing slightly as he was watching the figures before him. In the end, he nodded his head. "All right. Since he dares to snatch away what's mine, I will let him become the focus of everyone's attention and ensure he will no longer have any peace. Besides this, I want to issue a bounty. Anyone that kills the Prince of Bloodfang Kingdom Ezra Zephyr will be rewarded 3 million spiritual crystals." A savage smile was revealed on Ixtal's face as he said, staring at Shifa Pista, who was calmly guarding. "Inform the Prince of Stripe Beast Empire about what Bloodfang garbage has done to us." Once the bounty news and the report of this incident reached the Stripe Beast Empire's prince, Bloodfang martial masters will be plagued with an endless amount of trouble. Skylise nodded with a slight smile. She lifted her gaze and looked towards the opponents as she pondered. Ezra might think that playing fisherman was fun, but little did he know how much trouble was waiting for him once the fisherman was exposed. If he wanted to blame someone, he should blame his own lack of intelligence to pick the right enemies. So weak and yet still daring to seize the treasure of us, Stripe Beast Empire. While the two were conversing at a distance away from Bloodfang's martial masters, they suddenly sensed a strange disturbance from high up in the sky. They immediately lifted their heads in astonishment, only to discover thousands of light rays converging in the sky high above them, transforming into an enormous stone tablet. "What is that?" Ixtal involuntarily cried out. The stone tablet seemed to be extremely far away, but when they looked at it with their eyes, it was clearly visible. It was a magical feeling. Skylise also stared in astonishment at the stone tablet that had suddenly appeared in the sky. At closer observation, she remarked, there seemed to be some words on the stone tablet. The bearman also focused. Sure enough, he saw several ancient-looking words. "Those that can leave their names on the tablet will be allowed to enter the precious fields." At the top of the tablet were 3 words, "Distinguished Battle Achievements." Ixtal's heart shook violently, his eyes suddenly turning incomparably hot. "Precious fields? I once heard Father mention a certain area that exists within the Spirity Bailiwick called the Precious Fields. It is there that the greatest gift of the Spirity Bailiwick is hidden. But it has never appeared before, why has it appeared now?" Skylise covered her red lips in shock. She could not help but mumble, "Those that can leave their names on the tablet, what does this mean? How would one leave one's name?" The bearman pondered for a while, before he slowly said, "If I'm not wrong, it should refer to the Distinguished Battle Achievements." "Distinguished Battle Achievements?" The lady frowned. Ixtal nodded. The Spirity Bailiwick originated from an unknown powerful entity and is filled with mysteries and wonder. The Spirity Tablet that has appeared should be able to sense everything that happens in the entire Spirity Bailiwick. Which is to say, only those whom the Spirity Tablet judges to have distinguishable battle achievements will have the right to have their names on the tablet and be allowed into the precious fields. The gazes of the other prided geniuses beside Ixtal also began to burn with excitement. The Bloodfang Kingdom's martial masters were also gazing at the Spirity Tablet. The sacred grounds contained the greatest gift. If they could enter and obtain it, it would be akin to soaring straight into the heavens. "It seems that we'll have to find out what is considered a distinguished battle achievement," mumbled Gale Arms. However, a vicious look soon appeared in Shifa's eyes. "Now that you said that, don't we have a bunch of geniuses before us to wage battle?" Practically every individual in the entire Spirity Bailiwick had sensed the appearance of the Spirity Tablet in the sky high above them, causing them to raise their heads. The ancient words on the stone tablet were likewise clearly seen by everyone. The entire Spirity Bailiwick began to boil with excitement, the eyes of countless prided geniuses burning with anticipation. All of them clearly understood what it meant to enter the precious fields, only there would the greatest gift be found. Therefore, countless prided geniuses began to rack their brains. How distinguished did the so-called battle achievements have to be? At a certain area of the Spirity Bailiwick. Besides a clear stream, a figure with well-built body was currently extending his hands into the stream, holding the water in his hands as he washed his sweaty face. This familiar appearance, who else could it be but Argus Waska? At this current moment, his figure was exhausted and full of sweat, showing that he was running continuously while defeating the obstacles. He enjoyed the cool water for a while, before unhurriedly raising his head and gazing at the Spirity tablet in the sky above. Distinguished battle achievements? Argus lazily stretched his back as he mumbled to himself, I wonder how His Majesty is doing. Hope that he hasn't ended up stuck somewhere again after killing someone. Soon after, he lightly shook her head. I can't rest like this, I must find His Majesty as soon as possible. His big body rose, his clothes were muddy, and the small protective armor pieces had slight scratches. He rubbed his left gauntlet. Every one of Bloodfang martial masters possesses a special class weapon. But they were using unique class weapons instead, sparing the main for crucial times. Argus also wore unique class gauntlets. The tall werewolf was prepared to continue his journey to find the crown prince. He has yet to find anyone from Bloodfang. However, a certain coldness was currently gathering in the big and bold eyes of the young werewolf. Bright scales appeared on his gauntlets as an incomparably powerful cue slowly pulsed outwards. The stream next to his feet seemed to become extremely silent at this moment, the little waves within seeming to bow down while cowering. Argus slowly turned around as he looked towards the sky nearby where scarlet-red chi was streaking across the horizon in a dignified and domineering manner. Argus gazed at the scarlet-red chi. The 5 fingers were clenched into a fist and suddenly he threw a punch at the sky. A powerful punch was formed with scales of chi on it. Boom! The punch exploded as it collided against the scarlet-red chi. The sky seemed to shudder for a moment, before the scarlet-red chi descended from the sky, ultimately landing on a mountaintop near the stream. The scarlet-red chi slowly receded, revealing a figure in red robes. It was Victor Brownmane. Victor was expressionless as he lowered his head. His pupils tightened slightly as he looked towards Argus and slowly said, Why did you attack me? Argus stared at Wu Huang, the anger in his pupils more than enough to evaporate the entire stream. Don't you want to eradicate the Bloodfang kingdom? Now, let's see if you are capable of doing so. Argus's voice was clear, without the slightest hint of any fear. He stepped forward as he continued, at the same time, I also want to know if defeating you will count as a distinguished battle achievement. The moment his words faded, his entire body was covered with unique class armor, as additional scales of chi appeared on it. Have you heard? That prince of Bloodfang kingdom actually managed to snatch away the treasure of second-tier martial animal from the hands of Ixtal Molarch and his squad. His name was Ezra Zephyr, right? That can't be, right? Isn't that prince only at the chi brightening stage? And has disabled body. I heard that he took advantage of the moment when Ixtal's group and the second-tier martial animal exhausted each other. TCH, what great luck. There were spells and skills that he stole. The Bearman young leader has promised 3 million spiritual crystals to anyone who can catch THS Prince of Bloodfang Kingdom. Many have already went to the area he was last seen in hopes of capturing him, taking the spells and skills and then the bounty on his head. What an example of treasuring a jade ring becomes a crime. He's so weak and yet he still has the guts to have designs on a second-tier martial animal. That's practically asking the heavens a quick death. Shall we go and try our luck too? If we somehow meet him, it will be akin to striking lottery. That's exactly what I had in mind. He's only at the chi brightening stage, it should be easy to deal with him if we encounter him. Quick then, let's go. Ixtal stood with his hands behind his back on a certain mountain top. As he gazed at the figures that seemingly covered the sky and land as they searched for a particular individual, a chillingly eerie look emerged in his eyes as he said to the guarding martial masters of Bloodfang Kingdom. I believe he has abandoned you and ran away. At that time around 3,000 martial masters surrounded them, and the remaining martial masters of Bloodfang also arrived. All 56 core formation stage experts protected the area. Wow. Thor was about to retort Ixtal, but Shifa stopped him with a raising hand. Don't waste your breath on these useless beings. Despite the numbers, they let our single chi brightening stage prince steal the show. Her words were mixed with her chi and resounded, triggering the masses. They lost their calm, but Ixtal stopped them. He gritted his teeth after such an insult. Our priority is Ezra. These insects can be killed anytime, he said. He had done as Skylee suggested, and sure enough, many individuals had been drawn over to search for any traces of Ezra Zephyr. Although there was a lot of activity, they were still unable to find Ezra and eventually joined the encirclement with Shifa Pista and others in center. No need to be anxious. Ezra is definitely still in the area. Skylee's consoled from behind. Her long and narrow eyes stared at the vast mountain forests like a viper as she said, he is now merely a rat that has already been caught in our net. As long as we continue to tighten the net, he will eventually appear. When that happens, his few core formation stage friends will not be able to save him from death. Ixtal nodded, before forcefully expelling a long breath of air as he wanted to get rid of all the resentment he had towards Ezra. His path had been smooth sailing for many years, and his status as the Bearman tribe's next leader of Striped Beast Empire made it such that praise and compliance were all he would meet wherever he went. His tribe's fame and position was so strong that they were planning a revolt against Tigerman tribe's royal family. He never imagined that he would actually succumb to a ploy from a chi brightening stage guy. No matter what, he would not take this lying down. Skylee softly said, "Come on, a cripple is not worth getting angry over. How can such a person compare to you? Even when you discount your status, you're still someone who has already stepped into the realm of the core formation stage with a 6th grade martial spirit, and are even an elite amongst those of the same cultivation level. Besides those few individuals, who else amongst the entire younger generation of the Naren continent can match you?" Ixtal Molarch let out a bitter laugh. "If not because I used up too many trump cards to deal with the Razor Pearl Eagle, I would not even fear those few super elites. There would be no deficient if he had been able to kill the Razor Pearl Eagle with those trump cards, and he would have even grown his reputation, but unfortunately." While Ixtal Molarch and Skylees were talking, they suddenly detected a disturbance from the mountains some distance away. They immediately exchanged a look, seeing the joy that was surging out in each other's eyes. Was it that little rat? They pondered. Shifa and Thur gazed at the same area. They dashed towards the side before anyone else. All 56 Bloodfang warriors bolted towards that certain mountain. "Stop them!" Ixtal cried as their figures abruptly shot forth. They followed them and landing on a giant tree several minutes later as their gazes looked to the front where Shifa Pista and others could be seen. These figures from Bloodfang had surrounded a certain location, a faintly visible cave that had been blocked with a boulder. Ixtal saw a string paper attached on the boulder. So he's been using spiritual imprint to conceal any spiritual energy undulations. No wonder we couldn't find him. Ixtal's gaze swept across the cave, sensing the faint fluctuations of power from behind the boulder as he icily chuckled. The fake prince is hiding inside. Break the boulder. Whoever brings him out will be rewarded 3 million spiritual crystals. Ixtal's chilling voice echoed across the area. The eyes of several figures brightened. 3 million spiritual crystals was no small sum. Heh, to think that a little prince of a fallen kingdom would be worth such a fortune. I'll be glad to take it. Voices rang out one after another. A dozen figures swiftly shot forward, streams of powerful spiritual energy lashing at the Bloodfang martial masters, blocking the cave entrance. Just when they were about to attack, 2 swords shined at astonishing speed. With an unseen pattern, the swords moved. Swice. 2 heads were separated from 2 core formation stage individuals as the blood oozed out like a red fountain. Thur gazed at the thousand masses with murderous eyes. At the same time, a labrys was swung, cleaving 3 core formation experts from the waist in midair. Thud, thung, thiad. 6 thudding sounds came as the 3 divided bodies fell on the ground. Next. The chilling voice of Shifa stunned everyone. Ixtal's eyes widened, he clenched his fists, and stepped forward with evil intentions. Boom. However, while Ixtal was waiting for Ezra to be dragged out, an astonishing Genesis chi ripple suddenly pulsed from the cave like an erupting volcano. Rumble. The Genesis chi ripple was tyrannically domineering, causing cracks to form on the cave. Thump thump. When the astonishing Genesis chi erupted, everyone also saw the dozen figures that had just moments ago been menacingly charging into the cave, being flung out from the cave. They tumbled on the ground like bottle gourds, bumping against the ground till their faces were a bloody mess. What's going on? Ixtal's pupils shrank. One of the figures that had been sent flying replied in a horrified voice, He has ascended to the Heaven Gate stage. This caused even more frowns of confusion. Even if Ezra had ascended to the Heaven Gate stage, he would merely be at the initial level. However, the pulse of Genesis chi earlier did not seem to be that of an initial Heaven Gate stage practitioner. Bzz. While many were still puzzled, the Genesis chi undulations from the cave grew more and more berserk as the entire mountain began to tremble. Rumble. Genesis chi crazily converged towards the cave until a certain moment when it pierced through the walls of the mountain and dashed straight into the heavens. Everyone watched as a dozen-feet-wide pillar of dark gold Genesis chi soared into the sky, rapidly rising feet by feet. He has indeed ascended to the Heaven Gate stage. Ixtal's voice was filled with iciness. Sky coldly snorted. The phenomenon of chi dashing through the Heaven Gate is measured in feet. Do you recall how many feet your Genesis chi reached when you reached the Heaven Gate stage? Johnson indifferently answered, only 94 feet. His tone was normal, but clearly contained a faint trace of pride. Such an accomplishment was after all already top tier amongst those of the same generation. A smile surfaced from the corners of Sheila's ruddy little mouth. The Genesis chi of ordinary individuals usually reached about 20 feet when they advanced to the Heaven Gate stage. Your 94 feet has already surpassed the great majority. Johnson sighed. So what? I heard that when Monk's chi dashed past the Heaven Gate, his seemingly endless Genesis chi soared straight into the sky, reaching a height of 238 feet. Sheila also sighed when she heard this. It's rumored that Monk has a gold chi dwelling. Achieving such a feat is not strange at all. Her eyes seemed to swivel, a hint of mockery in her gaze as she looked towards the slowly rising dark gold Genesis chi from the mountain top before them. This kid has hidden for so long, believing that he will be able to turn this situation around once he reaches the Heaven Gate stage. I'm really interested to find out how many feet his Genesis chi will rise to. Ixtal laughed and sighed, no longer anxious for the time being. He intended to patiently wait till John fully ascended, when the latter was full of confidence, to thoroughly beat him into the ground, a defeat so complete that it would leave a shadow in his heart that would be almost impossible to break free of. John placed one hand behind his back, a toying look in his eyes as he looked to his front. The gaze of everyone in the area converged on this very spot. Hence, under the attention of numerous gazes, the dark gold Genesis chi that was still shooting out of the cave rose feet by feet at a steady pace. Have you heard? That Prince of Bloodfang Kingdom actually managed to snatch away the treasure of second-tier martial animal from the hands of Ixtal Molarch and his squad. His name was Ezra Zephyr, right? That can't be, right? Isn't that prince only at the chi brightening stage? And has a disabled body. I heard that he took advantage of the moment when Ixtal's group and the second-tier martial animal exhausted each other. TCH, what great luck. There were spells and skills that he stole. The Bearman young leader has promised 3 million spiritual crystals to anyone who can catch the Prince of Bloodfang Kingdom. Many have already gone to the area he was last seen in hopes of capturing him, taking the spells and skills and then the bounty on his head. What an example of treasuring a jade ring becomes a crime. He's so weak and yet he still has the guts to have designs on a second-tier martial animal, that's practically asking the heavens a quick death. Shall we go and try our luck too? If we somehow meet him, it will be akin to a striking lottery. Hee, that's exactly what I had in mind. He's only at the chi brightening stage, it should be easy to deal with him if we encounter him. Quick then, let's go. Ixtal stood with his hands behind his back on a certain mountain top. As he gazed at the figures that seemingly covered the sky and land as they searched for a particular individual, a chillingly eerie look emerged in his eyes as he said to the guarding martial masters of Bloodfang Kingdom. I believe he has abandoned you and ran away. At that time around 3,000 martial masters surrounded them, and the remaining martial masters of Bloodfang also arrived. All 56 core formation stage experts protected the area. Wow. Thor was about to retort Ixtal, but Shifa stopped him with a raising hand. Don't waste your breath on these useless beings. Despite the numbers, they let our single chi brightening stage prince steal the show. Her words were mixed with her chi and resounded, triggering the masses. They lost their calm, but Ixtal stopped them. He gritted his teeth after such an insult. Our priority is Ezra, these insects can be killed anytime, he said. He had done as Skylee suggested, and sure enough, many individuals had been drawn over to search for any traces of Ezra Zephyr. Although there was a lot of activity, they were still unable to find Ezra and eventually joined the encirclement with Shifa Pista and others in the center. No need to be anxious. Ezra is definitely still in the area. Skylee's consoled from behind. Her long and narrow eyes stared at the vast mountain forests like a viper as she said, he is now merely a rat that has already been caught in our net. As long as we continue to tighten the net, he will eventually appear. When that happens, his few core formation stage friends will not be able to save him from death. Ixtal nodded, before forcefully expelling a long breath of air as he wanted to get rid of all the resentment he had towards Ezra. His path had been smooth sailing for many years, and his status as the Bearman tribe's next leader of Striped Beast Empire made it such that praise and compliance were all he would meet wherever he went. His tribe's fame and position were so strong that they were planning a revolt against the Tigerman tribe's royal family. He never imagined that he would actually succumb to a ploy from a chi brightening stage guy. No matter what, he would not take this lying down. Skylee softly said, "Come on, a cripple is not worth getting angry over. How can such a person compare to you? Even when you discount your status, you're still someone who has already stepped into the realm of the core formation stage with a 6th grade martial spirit and is even an elite amongst those of the same cultivation level. Besides those few individuals, who else amongst the entire younger generation of the Naren continent can match you?" Ixtal Molarch let out a bitter laugh. If not because I used up too many trump cards to deal with the Razor Pearl Eagle, I would not even fear those few super elites. There would be no deficiency if he had been able to kill the Razor Pearl Eagle with those trump cards, and he would have even grown his reputation, but unfortunately. While Ixtal Molarch and Skylees were talking, they suddenly detected a disturbance from the mountains some distance away. They immediately exchanged a look, seeing the joy that was surging out in each other's eyes. Was it that little rat? They pondered. Shifa and Thur gazed at the same area. They dashed towards the side before anyone else. All 56 Bloodfang warriors bolted towards that certain mountain. Stop them! Ixtal cried as their figures abruptly shot forth. They followed them and landed on a giant tree several minutes later as their gazes looked to the front where Shifa Pista and others could be seen. These figures from Bloodfang had surrounded a certain location, a faintly visible cave that had been blocked with a boulder. Ixtal saw a strange piece of paper attached to the boulder. So he's been using spiritual imprint to conceal any spiritual energy undulations. No wonder we couldn't find him. Ixtal's gaze swept across the cave, sensing the faint fluctuations of power from behind the boulder as he icily chuckled. The fake prince is hiding inside. Break the boulder. Whoever brings him out will be rewarded 3 million spiritual crystals. Ixtal's chilling voice echoed across the area. The eyes of several figures brightened. 3 million spiritual crystals were no small sum. Heh, to think that a little prince of a fallen kingdom would be worth such a fortune. I'll be glad to take it. Voices rang out one after another. A dozen figures swiftly shot forward, streams of powerful spiritual energy lashing at the Bloodfang martial masters, blocking the cave entrance. Just when they were about to attack, two swords shined at astonishing speed. With an unseen pattern, the swords moved. Swice, swice. Two heads were separated from two core formation stage individuals as the blood oozed out like a red fountain. Thur gazed at the thousand masses with murderous eyes. At the same time, a labrys was swung, cleaving three core formation experts from the waist in midair. Thud, thung, thud. 6 thudding sounds came as the three divided bodies fell to the ground. Next. The chilling voice of Shifa stunned everyone. Ixtal's eyes widened, he clenched his fists, and stepped forward with evil intentions. Boom. However, while Ixtal was coming for Ezra to be dragged out, an astonishing spiritual energy suddenly pulsed from the cave like an erupting volcano. BBZZZZ. The spiritual energy ripple was tyrannically domineering, causing cracks to form in the cave. Crackle crackle. When the spiritual energy erupted, Shifa Pista and others also dashed away. What's going on? Ixtal's pupils shrank. One of the figures said. This seems like a breakthrough. This caused even more frowns of confusion. Even if Ezra had ascended to the higher level, he would be 6th level now. He would merely be one level higher in the chi brightening stage. However, the pulse of spiritual energy earlier did not seem to be that of a chi brightening stage practitioner. Crackle. While many were still puzzled, the spiritual energy waves from the cave grew more and more berserk as the entire mountain began to crack. The power crazily converged towards the cave until a certain moment when it pierced through the walls of the mountain and a black bolt struck at the sky. So fierce and powerful, everyone was taken aback. As the boulder got destroyed, a figure shot out before landing on the ground. He landed on the ruins of the crumbled cave boulder, opened his mouth and violently inhaled. The pillar of dark black lightning thundered at deafening noise. Crackle. Powerful bolts began to flicker from the figure's body, his aura surging as the air around him trembled. Long black coat flapping wildly, the young figure turned around and looked in Ixtal's direction. The revealed face naturally belonged to Ezra Zephyr. He stared at the bearman, a smile seemingly appearing on his face. 3 million spiritual crystals is truly a huge sum, even I am a little tempted to hand my head over to you. His 5 fingers slowly closed into a fist as he paused. However, before thinking about that, I believe that it is time for us to settle which one of us is the real beast man, the prince grinned. At the top of the crumbled boulder. Ezra's close fluttered, his eyes suffused with a sliver of iciness as he stared at Ixtal some distance away. Not only had the latter disrespected him and his kingdom, but Ixtal Molarch had also even placed a bounty on the prince, causing him no small amount of trouble. It was now finally time for these debts to be cleared. Ixtal did not seem to mind Ezra's icy gaze, instead, mockery appeared on the former's face as he coldly said. What bold words! Do you truly believe that advancing one single level in the chi brightening stage makes you invincible? Who here is not also at the chi brightening stage? Look around, fake prince, there are core formation experts ready to kill you. Moreover, so what if you have quite strong subordinates? At the end of the day, you lack strength and even let your subjects surpass you. His gaze turned towards the 56 martial masters of Bloodfang Kingdom in the area as he continued to speak. My bounty I previously placed on his head is still valid. Whoever can take his life will be awarded 3 million spiritual crystals. That applies to you guys as well. Why are you serving a ruined kingdom and a disabled prince? Join hands with me and your name will be renowned to the whole continent. Thur gritted his teeth. What he feared was happening. Their cultivation became the reason for their prince's disrespect. Your Majesty, Shifa spoke. Yes? Answered the prince. Shifa looked at Ixtal and uttered. I hear a dog barking, am I allowed to cut that noisy mutt down? The surrounding people guffawed as well. Those that laughed were clearly aiming for the bounty. 3 million was no small sum after all, and was more than enough to buy the martial resources they needed. Hence, several gazes filled with ill intent began to turn towards Ezra. It was just as Ixtal had said. In everyone's eyes, Ezra's only power was his country's martial masters who were guarding him. The current Ezra was merely a 6th level chi brightening stage practitioner. Although he was one level higher than earlier, this did not make much of a difference to the core formation stage and third circle practitioners present. Therefore, it was not long before a bald man walked out. He had a fierce-looking face, while cruelness flickered in his eyes. He displayed a savage smile to the prince as he said, "I've butchered quite a few geniuses, but it is my first time dealing with someone like you." Boom. Vigorous mana exploded from his body, revealing that he was a third circle sorcerer. Bang. His body lowered slightly and his foot powerfully slammed into the ground, causing it to crack as his figure was sent shooting forward like a cannonball, charging straight at Ezra. He is a close combat sorcerer? They are considered strongest. Small metal fragments started to form on his head as he cried. Second circle spell, metal scales. The bald man's shout was akin to thunder. One could only watch in surprise as he used his head as a weapon, mana surging over it as the smooth head took on a gleaming metallic black luster. The terrifying charge blasted away the surrounding air, an attack that was forceful and unyielding to the limit. The bald man's attack looked rather comical, but its ferocity still made the expressions of several people present change slightly. Surprise flitted across Ezra's eyes as he watched the black figure ferociously charge towards him. A rare metal user sorcerer. Every individual specialized in a different kind of spirit, while this person's most deadly weapon was his gleaming bald head. If it was before breaking through to the 6th level, I would have to be a little more cautious about this headbutt. The prince softly chuckled. He did not move to avoid the attack, merely slowly closing his 5 fingers into a fist as black bolts emerged on the back of his hand, bolts that violently thundered. In a few breaths, 2 small portals appeared around the prince. The prince mumbled, "Second circle spell, chains of chaos." The portals moved slightly ahead of Ezra. As the bald sorcerer moved through the duo portals, 2 black chains emerged from the portals at lightning speed. Zoom zoom. One chain caught the leg of the attacker while the other chain grabbed his neck. This was the spell that Ezra copied from the spell grimoire he bought in the auction. Ezra learnt the formula of that spell and kept practicing to make a spell of a similar kind. With the help of Fenrir and his terrifying talent, he made the second circle spell and named it Chains of Chaos. The advancing attacker was halted in mid-air, the chain pulled him back from marching ahead. Ezra's force power was rapidly consumed, but he didn't show any sign of it. "Arg, cough, what is this, arg?" The bald sorcerer was in agony. The chains were made of chaos force, and the nature of chaos force was to twist, rive and grind. His leg and neck were continuously tortured by the black bolts. Ezra tightened his fist as he stepped forward, sending a punch at the metallic face of the sorcerer, the 2 forces violently clashing together. Clanng. A loud clang rang out at the moment of impact, before a shockwave that could be seen with the naked eye swept outwards, causing crack after crack to grow from under Ezra's feet. Bang. A split second after these cracks appeared, everyone watched as Ezra's fist continued forward, sending the bald man's body flying backwards even quicker than he had arrived with a miserable cry. Thud thud. Blood flowed from the bald man's head as his body was sent flying onto the ground, smashing through several giant boulders before slowly coming to a stop. His figure was only visible for a brief moment before being buried by numerous broken boulders. No one knew whether he was dead or alive. Silence, complete silence. Everyone blankly watched this scene as they swallowed a mouthful of saliva. No one had expected that the ferocious headbutt charge of the bald sorcerer would end up with him being sent flying with a single punch from Ezra. The bald man had put his everything into that attack, not to mention that he was also an initial third circle sorcerer, that's the same as a core formation stage expert. The might of his earlier blow was so great that those of the same cultivation level had no choice but to avoid it.